Good morning, everybody. Just give you a quick 2-3 minute note. We'll get started here in just a couple minutes. Thanks. So quiet in here all of a sudden. All right, we'll go ahead and get started just a couple minutes early. Looks like we just got a few folks still coming in, but overall, I just want to say welcome back, guys. This is day 3 of our Future Conflict and Disruptive Technology Symposium. It's been really a whirlwind of speakers and just engagement with all of the cadets. Just like to, again, big thank you to USAFA and all the cadets here that have been coming and being able to be a part of this. Again, a shout out to our ROTC cadets that are here joining us. If you didn't realize it, I mentioned it yesterday. One, drove down from Boulder. We love having our Colorado friends here with us. But if you didn't know or realize it, our other cadet came all the way from Minnesota. So let's give them a round of applause for making, I think, the longest trip to get here. If you didn't know, they also got a chance to hang out and get some seat time in the MDL yesterday. So hopefully that was a good time for you guys as well. All right, so just again, quick, a little bit of admin. Remember, no cell phones on. We are recording live, and we do have sidebar rooms and collaboration rooms available if we need to take any conversations offline. We're at the unclassed level all day. Restrooms, again, closest ones are to my right, your left, around the corner. And then, of course, there's other ones in Arnold Hall as well. And if we do have to evacuate, we did just have a fire alarm go off in Fairchild Hall, so always having to be on our toes. Hopefully our fire alarm just today won't be another tech glitch, but again, I want to give a quick shout out to all of our tech support that helped us get through yesterday and continuing to make this thing run on smooth wheels. Let's give them a round of applause as well. But if we do have to evacuate, we'll just go straight out the back doors through Arnold Hall and over into the parking lot to the west side. Okay, so last but not least, again, you guys always got refreshments and drinks in the back. I just asked that you guys don't bring them down into the floor area. That's really a Polaris Hall effort to try and maintain this beautiful facility to the max extent possible. All right, so where have we been? We started off with the history of future warfare. Amazing day with General Ray, the history department, and General Clark, taking a look back at the history of future warfare, right? What have we thought about when we talk about future warfare in decades past? Yesterday, we really looked at what is the technology to succeed. Took a deep dive into 4 key areas. We could have picked a couple others, but these continued to bubble to the surface, and it created some pretty good dialogue on whether or not AI is a thing or not. Do we need to talk about just machine learning? What is the role of automation versus autonomy? What is the difference between autonomy and AI? Does that even a matter? We really took some time to look at hypersonics, and then, of course, introduced quantum being the buzzword that everybody loves to throw around, and added to the top of many discussions that are going out there. But hopefully we were able to demystify that just a little bit yesterday. So today we're going to ask the question, so what? You know, we've kind of been sprinkling that through a lot of the Q&A throughout today, or throughout the last couple of days. But we're going to really kind of delve into enabling the warfighter advantage today, and how that kind of takes us when we're not quite sure what technology is actually going to be adopted, which ones are really going to be the disruptors. Remember, we talked about with General Ray being disruptive with technology, not always knowing what technology is going to be disrupting. And so hopefully that's kind of what we're going to get out of today. So the lineup for today, amazing panel and lineup of speakers. We're going to kick off today with Dr. Sega here in just a minute. We've got 10 General John Shaw from U.S. Space Command joining us, as well as Mrs. Patricia Zarodkiewicz and several others, to include Ms. Tanya Skeen, who is the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Acquisitions, amongst many more panels that are going to come our way today. Bonus for you, lunch is being catered today, so stick around for that, and you'd maximize your SCA for that, but it'll be catered just here in the hall as well. Do remember for Q&A, again, because we got folks online, welcome to those that are online, but questions are going to be via mics on the left or right, and we'll get those to you through a floor runner as well. So without further ado, I'd like to turn the stage over to Major Nick Rail and to introduce Dr. Sega here, and we'll kick off today. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. Good morning, everyone. I have the distinct privilege to introduce Dr. Ronald Sega. He is currently a professor emeritus at Colorado State University and at the University of Colorado. Previously, he has served in various jobs throughout the DoD. Most recently, he was the Chief Technology Officer for U.S. Army Futures Command. He is a Woodward Professor and founder and director of the Systems Engineering Program, a special assistant to the Chancellor of Strategic Initiatives at Colorado State University. Dr. Sega is also the Vice President and Enterprise Executive for the Energy and the Environment at both Colorado State University and the Ohio State University. He has served as the Undersecretary of the Air Force, the Executive Agency for Space for the Department of Defense. He was the Director of the Defense Research and Engineering, the predecessor to Undersecretary of Defense for Research and Engineering. He is the Chief Technology Officer for the DoD, and he's retired Major General from the U.S. Air Force, serving as the Reserve Assistant to the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs. Dr. Sega, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, thanks.
Sir.
Okay, great to be here. And I had a chance to listen to the presentations yesterday, which were very good, and compliments to the folks at Strategy and Warfare Center. I was in the SWCC, the Space Warfare Center, a bit at Streeter Air Force Base. So I'll probably get the SWC thing backwards here, but it's a compliment to you folks to have this forum. I think it's really important. You have various views you saw yesterday, and I'll, through a few slides here in our discussion, try to kind of put this more in a systems construct. And so it's a background, actually, somewhat by accident for me anyway, and I'd be very consistent with Major General Wright's comments of do the best you can in what you're doing. And for me, I basically had no plan coming out. So I picked the major here at the Air Force Academy on Friday before spring break, because they said I couldn't go on spring break until I picked a major. And so I wanted something technical, had no idea. So I did physics and math as a foundation, eventually ended up electrical engineering and then systems engineering. And in many senses, as we look to the future, think about it as kind of system engineering a future battle space, which obviously is hard because it's very non-deterministic, if you will. But you have to be ready faster than we have in the past. And one of the themes that we'll talk about in here as well is speed and scale at range. And so I'm going to go over a couple things here. So director, as was pointed out, Director of Defense Research and Engineering is an older term, but it was some legends had been in that role before, in terms of Harold Brown and Johnny Foster and so forth. And I had three areas in 2001. I was in the Pentagon when the airplane hit, so it kind of refocuses, why you're there and what you're doing. So I was about a third of the way around there. And so we looked at, as you see there, National Aerospace Initiative emphasizing speed, velocity of high-speed hypersonics, access to space, and being responsive in space. The next is surveillance and knowledge systems, and that included a variety of cyber-related things, quantum and so forth, working with the NSA, and then energy and power systems to include a more electric force as well as speed. So directed energy, speed of light kinds of things. So speed, knowledge, and then energy. And at the end was workforce, and set up a national defense education program. 21st century, a lot about thinking and knowledge. Knowing stuff becomes very important, okay? And it's more difficult, and we have to know things faster, if you will, in the future than we probably have in the past. One thing to think about is data, and I'll probably, if I don't say it now, I forget about it. So we have data all over the place. And so I was in a forum several months ago in DC, and it was about collecting all the data and making some sense out of it. And the question is the data we have the data we need? So if Colonel Swain here has this paintball gun, and he's trying to search out Nick here. We'll pretend he doesn't know who he is. And we can have lots of, pattern recognition and sensors all over the place here, and be walking around Trotso and trying to find him. But if I know Nick, and I say, and you trust me, I said, it's Nick. One piece of data from one trusted source, all you need. And so, what data do you need? What question do you have, and what problem are you trying to solve? So that'll be one of our focuses here, and I'm going to kind of pick up the pace here a bit. So this National Aerospace Initiative is 2001, and I lay that out of looking at, again, a high-speed hypersonics, expendable, and how this kind of works through. And you heard about the hypersonics yesterday in some detail. Well, during that time, we had laid out the roadmap in some detail across Department of Defense and with NASA and so forth, and had submitted this and was asked to present this to the National Academy of Engineering, and they did a consensus study on this. But this kind of laid out 20 years ago now the path forward for kind of the boost glide stuff as well as scramjets, because that was another trend. Get another engine, another propulsion source for 21st century. So in this, you see along the bottom that there would be off ramps. You'd march left to right, and you'd learn. And that's going to be really key. Learn fast. And so you have some technology things that you see high-speed turbines and thermal protection, hydrogen fuel, and hydrocarbon scramjets and aerodynamics. But the off ramps are supersonic cruise missiles, mid-range, long-range strike, and responsive access to space. So you get better and better at this, and en route to it, it's not all or nothing. You should have decisions that get you going left to right in improving technology, but off ramps quickly. So we end up having capability fast. We took a pause as a nation in some of this, and obviously China and Russia, in a sense, took some of this roadmap and run with it. As undersecretary, I had a couple roles, and as the number 2 person, you do what your boss, other duties is assigned, obviously. But I had the responsibility of the executive agent for space. So it's not only the Department of the Air Force, but also things that were spaced in the other parts of the DOD, as well as coordination with the NRO. And as you get to more complexity, the system engineering stuff was important. Some satellites were way over budget. And the idea is how to do things quickly and with discipline and get them out the door. And so R&D was part of mine, as well as energy and an energy strategy for the Air Force. Our team ended up winning the Presidential Award for Leadership and Energy Management for the US government. So good team effort. So this X-51A, probably one of the things that I'd be kind of proud of, because I left and we worked on this, and we didn't get a lot of support, frankly, in the departments when I was in OSD for hypersonics, and then eventually it built on it. But I left the Pentagon in this role in 2007, and the team continued to have a fully successful flight in 2013. So building a team that endures is really key. And we're going to be in this for a long time. we're going to be into doing materials, doing a variety of things for a long, long time. I picked 5 tail numbers during that time, and it was during the DDR&E times. I left and they took 1, but you have to fly. You have to fail. You have to learn and get on with it. Okay, so we've done that in the past. You heard that a bit yesterday. So we were 0 for 3 in the flight tests on the X-51A, and then in the spring of 2013, climbed and accelerated and cruised at Mach 5.1 for about 4 minutes. So actually, a great flight, but it was the 4th one. Had we picked 3, it wouldn't have been so good. Clearly wanted 5, but we should be flying a lot. Anybody guess how many X-15s we flew, test flights? 199 flights. So we're doing a couple things like we fly 2. Okay, that's a smaller number than 199. So we got to get on it. And in this particular world, flying is kind of your airborne test bed, and it's fully successful. This one is planning for the future. This is a chart I used in Congress a couple times, where you have science and technology, building to technology development, building the systems development, building the system production. We increase risk on the lower one, science and technology, because that reduces strategic risk. So if the world's going fast, one of the highest risk things you could do is go slow or do nothing. And so we increase the risk on that one. So more things would be bumbling out of science and technology. Decrease the risk in system production. So this ended up kind of on cost, on schedule, GPS 3. A little bit of a deal with a merger acquisition for one signal source, L1C. But by and large, it was a progression of technology, but people also would be kind of more experienced as you move up the line, and there'd be a rhythm of production as you went across. But this sort of thing has a chance of giving you capability moving forward and not having to start and stop. You have a plan of continuing to mature things and have them loaded in. So on a Army Science Board study, we looked at what's going to be important going forward. And it was multi-domain battle, and then we named it multi-domain operations. That was better because it was going to be interagency as well as a joint and interagent and a multinational. So more operational options. Options are good in an uncertain world. Greater integration among the services, between the services, interagency are partners. Greater integration mentions realistic experimentation. I saw the red team, as you did some of the multi-domain lab, which is really impressive. And so you start amping that up. And the trick is to project to the future, right? So if you're doing things today, that's interesting. But the stuff you're going to present is going to be in the future, so you have to kind of anticipate that. So here's the duck chart. So if you have the static duck in the upper left is kind of an easy target, right? If you have a dynamic duck in the upper right, not so easy. And if you are filling gaps of today and the duck is moving in the lower left, you miss the duck. If you're only doing incremental change of what's happening to project forward, you're still going to miss the duck. So the question is, how much do you need to lead? What's our targets? And we did this technically and seeing what technical trends are and where we were, but we have to lead the duck. And so our metric is not necessarily of how we're doing today, it's how we're doing tomorrow. So if you're number 2 in your conference in football, and you say, well, we want to be 1 next time. So we need to go faster, more speed, more options on offense and defense. And you do that. You get ready for the season and feeling pretty good about yourself, getting high fives or faster, more options on offense and defense. Assistant coach comes back from the folks that were number 1 last year, and they got faster than we got faster. They added more options than we added options in offense and defense. Net result, you're further behind this year than you were last year, even though you're better than you were last year. So the reference point is your competition or adversary. We also looked at what's the world going to look like. This is kind of massive distributed bots, got little red lines or maybe a low probability of intercept, low probability of detect. You have people scattered around in there or close contact in that with the green things. The green things could be high bandwidth during peacetime or even maybe competition. But they may turn into really low bandwidth things during crisis or conflict, where adversaries have taken out the long haul comm and stuff, and you can only get messages. You can be spinning around pretty fast in the dash lines with lots of other unmanned stuff. So you could have a variety of swarms and autonomy and so forth. So the rest of our discussion basically here is going to be the role of people in this mix. So as we did the 2017 study, we had 64 visits across the joint interagency multinational community, including the General Haydns and so forth of the world, and kind of validated these things. And the sense is we need to go faster than we thought we had to go last time. Put a JADO bottle on a Roadrunner and made sure we included joint interagency and multinational. So one last quick story. So I was in aircraft as a pilot for about a dozen years, in space for about a dozen years, including mission ready crew commander at Schriever, and then this Army Science Board for about 8 years, and then the CTO for the Army Futures for another 3. So the ops was kind of important to see it from different perspectives. And what's the future look like? And one of the reservists that was with me, Air Force reservist out at Schriever, she was getting her PhD, University of New Hampshire, on they call it, instead of system engineering systems. But so the task was to look at our DSP satellites with fully qualified crews out at Schriever. And we had a couple of reservists that had a little bit more knowledge, cable, TRW and so forth. We amped up the complexity of the scenarios and looked at what knowledge of the operator meant. So as they were more non-deterministic and more complex, as you'd expect, but statistically significant work, that knowledge was important. And that was a precursor to space control and dynamic tasking.
Thank you, sir. I think those are some really interesting comments to start our discussion off today. I kind of want to tie a couple of them together in the first little bit, talking about decision-making, the person, and then data, all kind of working together. You talked about knowledge being key to the process. How do we identify the right data to make knowledge to create better decisions? How does that look?
Okay, obviously a tough problem, and we're going to work on the problem here in the next little less than 30 minutes. But the solution actually resides here. This is a future problem, okay? And we're going to have, as we talked in the system engineering program that we developed at Colorado State University, we had people here at the academy participating as well. But the idea of how do you address complexity going forward? And so typically, system engineering, you have a system and people interface with it. So human machine, interaction kinds of things. When things are going really fast and the machine is learning, the person has to be learning. And the question is, are we all fit to that kind of machine interaction? Are some of us better than others at this, but others are better at something else? So as we go forward, the question is, do we build machines so that everybody can use them or not? So if we had a team building a car that went 75 miles an hour, and with some training and license, about everybody could drive it, and another team said, well, we're going to build one at 300 miles an hour. Probably not everybody can drive this one. It could be a hand-eye coordination, it could be coordination, it could be stress, a variety of things. But if it's a day that somebody says, let's race, and one team was constrained that everybody could do it, good chance the 300-mile-an-hour team is going to win this race, right? So we're making decisions. The question is, like you said, what data is necessary and where do machines play? So this morning, Nick came up and put his hand out, and I shook his hand. I didn't need a machine to figure out that problem. Somebody in this area set the thermostat, maybe this morning, maybe last month. But after we did that, I go, it's over to you, machine. You go, a couple degrees too warm, add some cool. A couple degrees too cold, add a little heat. And that's the machine only deterministic problem. It knows it needs to dial in to whatever we set, 70 or something. The problem is in the middle, clearly. And so I started to draw the boundary, even though the classic texts have a system boundary around whether a computer or terminal or an airplane and we interface with it. The question is, when we have this coupled system where the people and machine are learning, isn't the system boundary more appropriate around both? So you're an integral part of the optimized human-machine system. So in decision-making, the question is, some things are constrained in time, some things are constrained in confidence, and some are in the middle. Lots of stuff in the middle, and that's the hard part. So we had 3 Mile Island or the Challenger accident. We're going to turn 3 Mile Island back on and fly again in the shuttle program when it was ready. We constrained in confidence. Whether the people at Pete or Cheyenne Mountain Complex, if there's a missile launched, after so many minutes, there has to be a decision. Are we going to call the president or not? So it's constrained in time. So when you end up in a lot of dynamic situations, the question is, do you wait for 100% confidence in the data to do that or not? So I had a PhD student, actually retired colonel, was a commander, a red flag, this last assignment, Bo Marzoff, and he did emergency response for a system engineering PhD on fires as an exemplar. We started off cyber, but got classified too fast. So we did the Waldo Canyon fire and the Black Forest fire here as exemplars. But if you know kind of enough, it's probably a good idea to get going, because there's a good chance that things get worse. Fire is a clear example. It kind of continues to spread. Cyber, if you have something penetrating the system, continues to get worse. Other things in the future battlefield, you can envision that, what is enough to make a decision, so you still have judgment involved. So you can be helped a lot with more data. And so as we think through this, the idea, if we're just flooded with data, the question is, what does it mean? And do we send up a system construct? I did this a little bit of my Air War College paper in 1990, actually, and with a fellow I talked a lot with, it was retired Air Force and was working for a contractor, but in 90, he was on advanced data acquisition processing transmission center that had data coming in, but it had more sensors than we had channels to bring it down. So we asked the first question to identify something, and we'd ask for a few more bands of hyperspectral to help identify and characterize it. We did that. He also was the DARPA program manager in 1974 for artificial intelligence. So AI was also around for a bit, and you heard it, AI, ML. So very, very helpful. But what is the role of people in these situations? Some of them, as you talked a bit before, is also going to have strong inputs from the values of the United States, ethics, moral law that's in place. But some things are going really fast. So if there is a missile heading toward this room from Fairchild Hall, we could have a meeting here and discuss it for a bit, or the good chance it's too late, right? We have already had to think through that, and it was that it was not people involved, the missile in there. It's pretty easy that we would have our system set up to act, because it's well beyond human speed, well beyond, for sure, a committee meeting of some sort. So that one's beyond human speed for decision making. We've got to have thought through that. Active armor, for example, in the folks that are ground vehicles, it's got to just act. So then if you stretch it out and say, okay, it's actually, you know, at the library, and or it's at the North Gate, or it's at the field, say it's at Field House. And so it's coming here. So that's the idea is, how would you dial that in? Would it make any difference if there was no people between the field house and here, or it was a time after classes when everybody's going down for intramurals and it was just packed with people, the missile? Does that make a difference on how we'd handle that? How about the North Gate? At what point do we have enough time that people can intervene in this situation? They clearly can and need to intervene in the design of this thing. What are the parameters that says that this is going to act with something that's at the North Gate coming toward this room? So you end up thinking through the limits of people. Israelis look at pattern recognition a bit in cyber and so forth, and they say, you know, the younger folks, the 18 and range, is probably the best age as people start from, you know, the beginning and to the older age in terms of pattern recognition of some of the stuff that you see in cyber. But then there was a DARPA challenge for cyber that had 5-minute increments for 95 sessions, and there were 5 or 7 teams down selected over a 2-year period, and the systems would attack each other and do the patches and so forth, and recover in within the 5 minutes. And if you look at this at YouTube, it's kind of DARPA cyber challenge. But the folks that did that, you know, about an hour into this hour-and-a-half analysis of the cyber challenge, they said, you know, the easiest one we've ever done in terms of patch, it's taken us 20, 30 minutes. Just wasn't possible for us to do the things that we're witnessing here, those 5-minute rounds, 95 of them, you know, in this DARPA challenge. So to the decision making, the question is, what are the constraints? What is the problem? How much time do we have? Can we be, you know, in the loop, on the loop? So we do missile defense. We say, you know, go on a strategic missile defense. And then the missile does a variety of things and we watch it. And we can say no, but we're too slow to say yes. So if it ends up being something that there's a satellite that's not a problem, for whatever reason, we can, you know, terminate the thing as people being kind of on the loop, but we're too slow to go do the yes, yes, yes decisions. If that helped.
So thank you, sir. So I think I have lots of questions, but I think I'd like to turn over to the cadets to see if they have any questions for you.
Okay.
I can ask you questions all day. So
any kind of a range of things. Well, the one NASA thing. So it's, Plan Bs are important. So I was fortunate to be involved with kind of the co-principal investigator and program manager of a thing called a Wake Shield. And we end up, I end up being selected in NASA, and I was ready about the same time it was for the flight. In fact, I think I have one. Let's go up for here. I did. Okay. So this Wake Shield thing was supposed to be deployed on the first flight, but the idea of testing and final configuration ended up being a data point that got buried into my head, because in the case of it getting ready for flight, I was training for the flight, and we had done the attitude control system at the factory kind of thing with the correct signal, the Earth's LEM CO2 line, and all the flight cables and so forth were there, and it worked. It's a momentum reaction wheel kind of construct like a GPS satellite. So when we took it to the Cape, and I wasn't part of this, they set it all up and put the power and signal cables and tied them together, and they put a hot source into the sensor, and the continuity was right, and off we go. In space, took it out. I was the arm operator and set it up, and it didn't work, which was not good, obviously. and later on, we learned that when you put the power and the signal cable together, there was interference, electromagnetic interference. But we had plan B. And I kind of had worked on keeping that and also a laptop for another way of doing it, not being single string. What is plan B? What is plan C in many cases? So we had the ability to do this on the arm rather than releasing it for going out 40 miles and recovering it later on. So the idea of being prepared for stuff to go wrong is also important. So the dynamics, and again, how the people and machines interact going forward was important. In this case, we had some kind of human intervention to go to plan B, and off we went. So that's kind of also important as we go forward. So let me go back to our fast road runner.
Any questions from the cadets?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. A very good question. So, folks thought about that. So the idea is on the automation, and can we put some of those into play? In a sense, do human beings always need to be in the decision making for that? And so this is a critically important question going on. What is the role of people in the future? So what do the service academies prepare people to do going forward? Is it the same in the class of 23 as it was in the class of 63? No. Okay, and so it's interesting in the Army, and I work closely with the CTO, with the commanding general there, General Murray. He'd tell the story that for a kind of a gunner, in the days that he was going through early on, they have these flashcards on different types of tanks and so forth, and vehicles that you'd come against. And if you got an 80 on the test, then you're ready to roll and get in there and shoot. Okay. If we can do better than 80, was the decision better with people, the person that finished at 80 on the exam, or the machine that could do 95 with confidence in that situation? So that's a tough problem. But there are scenarios that we're going to run against that we are simply too slow. And the consequences of being too slow in this kind of thing, a battalion could go away, because we didn't act, and things are going to rain down there. So we have that on one side, and so this is the problem that we have to wrestle with, that we have to get data on a variety of situations. The suggestion for the service academies, I've actually worked closer with West Point than I have here on this problem, and I still have a role with DARPA currently. The idea of trying to get data and having the service academies being a laboratory for leadership, which is important, potentially a laboratory to sort out what is the role of people going forward. Now, we have a lot of constraints, and you can also look at cruise missiles and so forth when they head off, and we're confident that's a good target. XYZ, we've proven that it's really reliable to get to XYZ, and we have exclusion zones of things we definitely don't want to be at, so that they can't get to that kind of thing, even with a reprogramming kind of activity in some cases. So you are involved. The question is, where and when are you involved? Can some people in this optimized human machine system stay engaged in there at this higher speed, and then beyond that can't? Do we know what the limits of people are in certain decision-making processes? So fundamental to this is, what is beyond human speed? And if the adversary is there, The question is, how can we get there consistent with our values? So we have to, how do we know more? Know it earlier. So there was obviously very, very tough problems with IEDs and so forth in the Middle East. So you have a woman stroller on the street corner. What's in the stroller? Is it a baby? Is it a bomb? Really hard. So the question is, do we have knowledge of assuring us it's one or the other is important, and how do we go about doing that? So that ends up being really important. And then the issue is, what is the data we need? And so we worked on that problem, the ID problem. And so you'd like to find bombs and do something so they wouldn't go off. But it turned out to be activity ended up being even more important. And work your way back to the bomb maker. So the question is, knowing stuff, really, really important. And going against these scenarios and wrestling it down with a multidisciplinary approach, hard sciences, soft sciences, this is the systems problem that's hugely important. So if you had an exercise that one group here at the Academy didn't have a lot of machine help, and another one did, test that. Have the academics prepare you for those exercises that were significant in speed and scale. And you can kind of throw in the range if you want. But I think there's an opportunity to do that. You're the ones that are going to carry this thing forward. You might as well be figuring out what the answers are and the parameters in a non-deterministic situation. Some of them are a little easier. So I have a PhD student, she's down at Charleston with 787s, and she has a master's in mechanical engineering and master's in human factors and a master's in program and project management. And she was on the task to kind of sort out the 787. The variety of people tried heavy automation. Boeing did that, Tesla did that, and the idea was too much, and they had to kind of tear it out and add more people into the process. So the question there is, her deal is optimize human machine systems on manufacturing and assembly, and looking at parameters that are non-deterministic, because that's where it's hard. It's hard. What's the problem? Sometimes repair and overhaul. And one that's a scenario that's probably a little bit more machine, one that's a little bit more balanced, one that's a little bit more human-centric. And so this is work that needs to be done. In my view, it has not, particularly with military situations, particularly with people that are going to be leading this activity, which is you, and in an environment that you can have, in a sense, in a very positive way, controls, kind of see if this works or doesn't work. Not unlike GPS when it first showed up. Fighter pilots were not fired up about GPS. And it was a better idea to just manually fly it with a pipper and get the best scores, and someone would buy a drink at the bar. And then you had the system that you just kind of dial things in, and the bomb goes off, and it turns out it's more accurate. So after a bit of this, as the legend goes, with people not liking it, but better scores, you go, okay, still don't like this stuff, but we hate losing more. So put some of that, GPS stuff on our airplanes, and off you go. So the question is, in terms of people needing help from machines, there's this, all this, it's the digital age. Let's just put the whole solution, ones and zeros, on this giant board here. And you get very good, looks at it and go, we don't do ones and zeros that well. We're kind of people, we're kind of analog. So how do we interface with that particular problem? Can you get it in some tractable form? So in DARPA, we had a variety of programs, understandable AI, decision-making under uncertainty, new ones in terms of swarms for offset, bringing things in Astarte and a few other things that you heard about a little bit in the past to try to get a handle on this. But doing this exercise is important. Another one was out in Pittsburgh, where I was with the artificial intelligence folks from the Army There's an integration center in Pittsburgh, right across the street from Carnegie Mellon, across the street from the Software Engineering Institute. So we're out in the slag pits east of Pittsburgh, where they took the slag from the steel mills and dumped it, and it wasn't useful for much. And we had 2 medium-sized ground robots, 2 small, 2 air UASs, and they were maneuvering around these roads and so forth, and collaborating and doing great stuff. And so at one point they got confused. And so the question is to the person running the AI thing, are they allowed to ask people for help? No, because the folks doing the research wanted to do full autonomy. Machines are allowed to ask people for help. Humans are allowed to ask people for help. And the question is, what is the optimized human machine system? We just don't know that problem against some of the things that you're talking about. When we have a system that we as Americans need to operate under with our values, ethics, morals, laws, so forth. Hard, and I would suggest we don't know that answer. We need to experiment with it, realistic experimentation with numbers to understand, how people align well with that. There's probably a couple disciplines in the academic world that we don't offer currently that are necessary to get this to work. So that would also come out of a laboratory potentially here at the Air Force Academy, West Point, or Annapolis. Next question.
Well, sir, I think we're out of time. I think we're going to date ourselves with the JATO rockets. I don't know how many people in here will actually understand.
Do we have 4 more minutes or no?
About 4 more minutes, yes,
Okay,
sir. So we have one more question out there?
I'll go fast. I can get you a couple more questions now. I'll make these last ones really rapid fire here.
All right, good morning, sir. You emphasized how we need greater speed in terms of like technology advancement and acquisition, yet the current precedent with our defense contractors is the complete opposite, where we've seen the F-35A, the KC-10A, and along even with our GPS-3 satellite production that are years behind, way over budget, way over complex, and way overdue. So how do we incentivize our defense contractors to internalize our emphasis on greater speed and technology advancement?
Okay, great question. So you got to go watch this word requirements kind of thing. And I had a big caution of that in my system engineering as well as at Futures Command. Early on, you need to do needs analysis and validate that. Concept exploration, validate that. Concept definition. And finally, you did on some details we generally call requirements. So what are the characteristics and attributes do you need? So this thing was on cost, on schedule, because we looked at what was mature enough to fly. We knew this new signal L1C was there, a bit more power, but other stuff that we really wanted, like crosslinks, which is on that chart in block 2, crosslinks wasn't ready. And so it was going to be thought about in hooks and scars in 3A, but it wouldn't be ready until 3B. We had a program manager who could say no on this. And we held to it with 80% confidence interval. That means you're still going to be 20% off, but challenge the contractor to meet the 50% level. Program manager would have 10, program executive officer would have 10, and I kept 10 as service acquisition executive kind of thing in terms of margins for getting this thing done. Another thing going fast, after 9/11, I was in there, I got the technical community together on the 19th, come back on the 21st, 48 hours later. What can you accelerate in 3 months? And we picked 3 things. And I worked with General Gene Renoir, at that time a 2-star, and the 3 at SOCOM. We prioritized this list of 150. One of them is basic research. In September of 2001. October, they were done with their bench stuff to pick, and little experiments to pick one in the middle of October. Middle of November, we had built up enough to do static testing in the tunnels in Nevada. And on December 14th of 2001, we did the mode 3 delivery off of F-15 Eagle into the tunnel structures, and did the legal review, and start to finish from basic research to field and system 90 days. So I met with them every morning to see if I could knock down or waive anything in the process to go fast, just to be helpful. So I was in the area of trying to help. We can do it. We have to go fast. So that's one of the elements of that chart. It's several dimensions is the key. You got to get the JATO bottle, of course, Technology advancement, data collection, decision-making, acquisition, deployment, maneuver, response time, weapons velocity, everything goes higher and faster. The question is, how does the people part work in that kind of environment? Does that help? We can do it. I argued for the OTAs, other transactional authorities, principally for DARPA, and that's one vehicle to go faster. One more question.
Yeah, one more question, sir.
That one here. Short answer. Does that make sense to everybody? It's a big deal. And you're the ones that are going to be leading this. And I think the inputs in your work could be very helpful to leadership of the Department of the Air Force. Congratulations to this forum. This is important as well. And thank you very much for allowing me part of this this symposium. Appreciate it.
We're going to give Dr. Sega a round of applause. And sir, we'd like to present you with a gift as an appreciation for you spending your time with us today.
Okay.
So a piece of the drop through the grave.
Okay.
I appreciate it, sir.
All right.
Thank you for your time.
Appreciate it. Thanks.
Let's give him a round of applause. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take a 5-minute break. Please be back in seats by 0850. Thanks.
I'm sure he does though. I really don't think it's bad.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, if I could ask the cadets to start filling back in the seats from the front, please start making your way down to the auditorium. Thank you. We're gonna go on the on notice list. We're gonna go on the on notice list. Not careful. All right, I'm loving all the sidebars and the great discussions, guys, but let's go ahead and make our way back down here into the auditorium, into our seats, guys. I'm gonna question everybody that's leaving right now. Looking at you. Come on down. Carter, why are you sitting in the back, bud? all my folks in the back. Come on down. Danny. Vic, come on. All right, guys. Good morning and welcome back again. Appreciate everything we heard from Dr. Sega. Really amazing career and experiences that he shared with us. And again, so I want to say thank you for that, sir. Appreciate your taking the time to speak with us today. We're going to shift gears here just for about the next hour. We're going to hear from a unique and distinguished panel, the cadets themselves. And so Dr. Becerra has graciously offered to moderate a cadet panel, thinking about cadet perspectives on things that we're facing in the next 5 to 10 years with technology, and kind of taking a look at what we've learned, what are the challenges that as they see them, and what I would like to see, and I really hope to see, is some really great questions from peers and trying to understand as you guys wrestle with this together, because this is your future, right? And so as you challenge each other to think through these problem sets, maybe we don't have the answers right now, but even if we were asking the right questions, that's probably a good place to start. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Dr. Becerra, Paul Becerra, who's going to be leading the panel. I think his resume goes without mention. I think most of us know him, but we also have joining us today C1C Nora Ashoff, Jacob Hannes, Michaela Conkle, and Bradley Westhauser. So let's give them a round of applause. Thank you.
First, thank you, Colonel Grant, for the polite invitation and including us in this distinguished symposium today. Thank you, everybody, for coming along. Those of you on SCA with nothing else to do, I appreciate you following through. Now, the ROTC folks, again, a warm welcome. Thank you for making the trip. I am Dr. Becerra. Everyone knows me as Dr. B. I'm an assistant professor in the Military Strategic Studies Department, primarily teaching international security, which is where I know some of these cadets from, but also research methods, which is where I largely know the others and many of you from. Now, Colonel Grant did already communicate his expectation for you in the crowd. You will ask brilliant, insightful questions. And anyone that has had class with me in the past knows that in the absence of brilliant, insightful questions, I'll just simply call on my friends by name to then provide them. So Jay, I'm looking at you. So Jay, let me get us started though, give you something to work with. So folks, we've had this great programming for the last day and a half and the rest of today oriented around the future of warfare, primarily with a close focus on artificial intelligence, which we now know is a scam, and we should just call it machine learning, Hypersonics, which my takeaway from the panel yesterday was goes fast, hard to see, big boom, and then a lot of science. And I don't mean MSS math, but also quantum computing. Fascinating. So today's panel, we're going to use those as a springboard though, and really open the vectors a bit wider. The payoff here is cadet perspectives on the future of warfare. These perspectives are informed by an incredibly robust curriculum developed with the magic school bus experience as our model and Miss Frizzle as our shepherd. So with that in mind, and for that as our background, I'm going to turn to our cadets. And I'm going to open the floor up with a general question that I'd really like all of your responses on. You've been on this incredible journey, coming up on 4 years now. My office overlooks what is a part of campus called the steps. The steps are painted on the street. And on I Day, when excited parents drop everyone off at the academy to go become a cadet, they're bussed up to this spot right outside my window. And I look down on them and it's an incredible day. But I see a lot of apprehension. Oh no, what did I get myself into? Because this is the first opportunity you have to really stand at attention and to have some first degrees yell in your face. Although I think they're getting nicer, is my observation. We call that I Day. Cadets, I want you to think about the image you had of future warfare on I Day in your head relative to what you picture now as the future of warfare. How has that picture changed? And I think it might be helpful if we just go right down the line.
All right, I can start. So when I came, so I'm C1C Nora Ashoff. I'm obviously an MSS major. And when I showed up on I Day, I'm from a super small town in Iowa. The closest base is Offutt Air Force Base. And I like to say that I grew up in a Cold War household. So my mom's an immigrant from Eastern Europe, and I came with this standard of conventional warfare. So my thought when I arrived was I knew the Air Force was planes and speed and taking out our enemies, right? But when I showed up on I Day, I had my eyes set on Russia. And through my time at the academy, that's completely pivoted. Obviously, we've seen kind of the change into China, but that really showed up in most of my classes. So everything that we've done has always been tied into something. So all of our curriculum, right, is focused on a particular scenario or something along those lines. And so I saw the difference between we started with Russia, we looked at their nuclear capabilities, and all of a sudden we were looking at IO operated by China. How are they working in their own country? How can we see that outside? What are the economic consequences? How else can we see that they're relating to other countries? How are they trapping other nations? How does that impact what the US is doing? So I'd say the biggest shift that I've seen is that pivot between Russia to China and kind of seeing how we need to be able to work with our near peer competitors and see how we're looking at 2 targets this time, not just 1.
Awesome. So I'm C1C Brad Westhauser. I'm also an MSS major. For me, the big thing, right, was when we first showed up here as firsties was the big focus was on the war on terrorism. Focusing a lot on special operations tactics and small unit tactics with a very permissive environment with regards to the air component. Obviously, that's shifted quite a bit with regards to the PRC and Russia and focusing on that. Within the first year, the rise of the Space Force was created. And so just seeing that shift, right? Both the PRC and Russia have this nuclear and cyber escalation that we haven't seen in a while. And I think because of that, we need to focus our attention towards things like AI, hypersonics, quantum computing, and all that. And I think that's a huge focus going on forward in regard to our airspace and cyber domains.
Hi, I'm Michaela Conkle. I would say the biggest thing that comes to mind from iData here is the word potential, or like potential to be critical thinkers. When I got here, I kind of expected to just be another cog in the wheel, just another person in the Air Force that was just going to do some job. And the biggest thing that I've seen stressed since I've been here, just in the conversations, in the classrooms, and the different briefings we've had, is that the Air Force needs critical thinkers. As like Nora and Brad talked about, as we're like facing a new threat and everything's changed, the global war on terror is not the main focus anymore. And that's kind of what we grew up seeing. So I think that just the word critical thinking comes to mind in terms of the fact that we need to get creative. We need to start thinking about problems differently.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jake. So when I got here, I didn't know much about all the different things with regards to, I'm moving the mic too much, with regards to warfare in terms of space and cyber and all this joint stuff and just the complexity of it. I understood warfare was people leading other people to kill other people. Like at its core, that's what warfare is. And in the past 4 years, my mind hasn't changed on that. The character of war, I don't think has changed in thousands of years. But the nature in which we fight it has, and all the layers of complexity have. So in terms of my change in understanding, when I got here was, it didn't really change. I only learned more in depth about the different aspects of warfare and how the people who are actually slinging lead down range are supported. Maybe that, like, I came from an army family and they're very like, you know, infantry type of stuff. I'm not as much that way. But at its core, we are going to be leaders, leading people, trying to hurt other people. So when I came in, yes, it was that idea of like, okay, I understand that war is going to be hard, war is going to be brutal, no matter where you are. But being in the major for several years now, it's only been, I guess, amplified in terms of how necessary all those other components are. So all that to sum up, I've really only gone deeper into things that I kind of, I guess, already realized at the core. Yeah, it's kind of a roundabout answer.
It's not at all, because really what it kind of aligns, if I kind of run backwards now, the nature of warfare isn't changing. It's force used towards political objectives. But I think what Jake is really pointing out is there has been dramatic shift in the terms of the how, not necessarily the why, but certainly the how, such that all that complexity, the other tools, the other domains, well, aligning means to ends is certainly harder. And it's going to require greater critical thinking. And maybe artificial intelligence can help you do it too, if you trust it, right? So Nora, that's a really helpful segue into, Nora, can you share with the audience your cadet summer research project? Because in private conversations, I've really been struck by the notion that you kind of already think you have a sense of where AI might go, at least at an operational level, or how the Air Force could use it.
Yeah, absolutely. So this summer I researched at the Institute for Defense Analysis, supporting the Director of Operational Test and Evaluation. So basically what we were looking at is how air operation centers of the future are going to change. That's going to be something that we're all going to interact with in our time at the Air Force at one point or another. And honestly, I'd not been familiar with it at all until I reached there. So when I started, I had absolutely no idea. They laid me out with the 800-page AFTTP on AOCs and said, good luck. And by the time I came out, we had developed a 3S construct is what we called it. So the way that AOCs are going to change is going to be speed, structure, and standardization. And AI is going to play a big role in a lot of that. So when we start with speed, the current start for an air tasking order, if you're not familiar with it, basically how we allocate all our aircraft, takes 48 hours. That is, it takes 2 days. Yes, so it takes 48 hours. And a lot of that is actually somebody typing in the data. And clearly that leaves a lot of room for error, and it takes a massive amount of time to be able to type everything into the right decimals to everything. And we're allocating all our aircraft based off of that. And so what we're looking at there is that if we combine automation with AI and have machine to machine be able to actually communicate with each other a lot more efficiently, then we can compress the cycle down. When we come into a crisis, then we want to compress the cycle and our aircraft can get off the ground faster, because honestly, we're not going to have the luxury of time forever. And right now in certain AOCs, especially I was at Davis Monthan, and so they call themselves the non-kinetic AOC, then we have a lot more time to actually take care of things. But in this case, when we're looking at a conflict potentially with Russia or China, time is of the essence. And so we have to be able to compress the cycle. The second major place that AI, for example, would play a major role is going to be in the structure of an AOC. So right now we have 7 major AOCs that are located geographically. So for example, in Germany, that's the main one that we actually were talking about for a large portion of it. The thought is that we'll compress AOCs down into 3 major ones and forward deploy the combat operations portion of it into another region. And so let's say that CENTCOM's having a crisis, we'll forward deploy the combat operations and have them operate from the field so that we're resilient. Right now, if we take out an AOC, it's not going to be able to be helped. Like we're going to lose that major focus in UCOM or CENTCOM. But if we can forward deploy and they're mobile units, then it'll be a lot more efficient and resilient when we're looking at a conflict. Integrating with AI on that front is going to help us collect data more efficiently and also make the forward deployed units a lot more independent. And so hopefully the thought there is that we're resilient using AI in order to actually fight back against our enemies.
So in effect, there's an opportunity for efficiency within AOCs to be improved through an application of AI that may well actually facilitate a different structural concept. Fascinating.
Yes.
Now, folks, quick disclaimer, when cadets say these things, a lot of times they surprise me because I'm a civilian by background. I've never served, and my current outfit is the closest I get to blues. So this notion that something in the Air Force as important as tasking an airplane takes 48 hours, I'm not sure it inspires me. But kind of with that in mind, though, on the airplanes, because if I've learned anything about the Air Force, it's that it involves airplanes. Brad, I know that in our research class together, you wrote an op-ed really kind of identifying what are the future options for pilots. In a world where AI is now part of the conversation, where remotely piloted is now part of the conversation, but everybody in this room wants to hold a joystick and hit the throttle and be in a cockpit. So what does kind of the future of conflict look like for you as a pilot?
Absolutely. I think the big thing, right, is AI is so important to how we're going to function going forward with future warfare. I think, as this symposium has talked about, and as we've talked about a lot in class, AI and like remotely piloted aircraft is huge. We've seen discussions about swarming and stuff like that in regards to the Middle East and how we use drones and such. But the one thing you can't put in place with AI is that human factor. Human factor in regards to pilots is so critical to how we operate that you can't take it away. And so I think, a big focus is how do we combine both of them to work together? AI is so important in how we operate. And I think if we can find a way to combine them and, utilizing both manned and unmanned aircraft, that would be huge. I know we've talked about stuff like the next generation fighter and stuff like that. And that kind of incorporates that. And I think that's the direction we have to go forward, is utilizing both to keep our air superiority going forward.
Now let me kind of put you on the spot if I can, because I'm thinking about what I've learned about the Air Force and kind of pilot culture and having talked to many cadets over the years about your AFSC preferences and whatnot. It seems to me that there is a significant non-trivial desire to be a pilot, but that's a different AFSC than being an RPA, which looks like piloting to me as a civilian in these kinds of blues. But that's not often the perception that I get when I'm asking cadets about their AFSCs. It seems that a lot of cadets believe being a pilot is being in the cockpit, not being in something that looks like the MDL-ILDs, the immersive learning devices, right? So Bradley, on the one hand, give me a fact check. Is that your perception of how cadets see these different opportunities? But also second, can you rank these out for me? What's your number 1, 2, and 3? Is it pilot in a cockpit? Pilot but not in a cockpit? Just not a pilot because the AI does it? I'll give you a minute to think it over. Everyone stare at him.
So I will have to agree. I think the perception of RPA and pilot have this kind of separated way about going things, right? Obviously, one is in the cockpit and the other one is controlled on the ground. For me, I'd probably say I'd rank pilot first. I think, that's crucial to having that human element within the cockpit, making those game time decisions in the aircraft, understanding what's going on with the aircraft. You can't take that element away. And so, this is my personal bias, obviously, but I think, the human element is the most important part. And so I would rank secondly the RPA, utilizing both that, and then AI would be third. I still think it's crucial, but I don't think we're at this stage in development yet where we can totally depend on AI. I think we need to, work a little more, work with the databases about where it's getting this information and how it's going forward with the way we operate in the air. And so that's kind of my rationale for how I'd rank the three.
Absolutely. So I mean, I would automatically think about the future of the pilot trade and AI as really kind of a culture change. And one of the things we've learned about change from the last day and a half or so is that change is difficult. Not just culturally, but technologically and tactically, change is very hard. So that's something to keep in mind as kind of you depart today, thinking about the future of warfare, is where each of these technologies suggests change will be needed. I don't want you to think that change will be easy, because it may well challenge perceptions of what it means to be a pilot, things that are core to this service. But nonetheless, the larger objective is the United States, isn't it? It's something to think about. Michaela, on the subject of kind of the larger objective, the Air Force and the entire military is not made up exclusively of officers. This is not a surprise to anybody in this room. There is a non-trivial proportion, perhaps the majority of the military, that is actually enlisted. We have this incredible opportunity at the Academy to really think about this nation's problems from a strategic level in depth for 4 years, and to work through operational and tactical elements to achieve those objectives. But Michaela, you have prior enlisted experience. And from my conversations with you, the strategic level isn't always where the enlisted are, right? So I know one of the things I've told you is it'll be really important for you to leverage that experience as a second lieutenant to help your team, because a pilot unto him or herself is not a team. It's just one person. How can you leverage all this knowledge?
Yeah, thanks, Dr. B. So I think the biggest thing, like having been prior enlisted, is these kinds of strategy, high-level conversations aren't being had with lower airmen, which makes sense, right? There's a place for, kind of shut up and color and just do your job, being that subject matter expert in one thing. But I think as everything's changing, I think it's becoming more and more and more important that airmen at all levels are kind of aware of what's going on, what the bigger fight is. I can tell you that when I was enlisted, we never once talked about China. I never even thought of China as kind of an adversary or, what's the big deal with China? These conversations were simply not happening. And I'm sure they were at much, much higher levels. But to airmen that were working the desks, airmen that were on the flight line, we kind of didn't see that bigger picture. And I think I can speak for the couple prior enlisted in the room as well. I don't think you guys were seeing those conversations had either. And it's really hard, I think, for enlisted airmen who are, working 2 a.m. on a mid shift, putting together some product or going through some checklists or reading TTPs or whatever it is, to kind of see that bigger picture. And I would encourage, as like going to be a junior officer, to kind of facilitate those conversations. These are things that I definitely think are important. And it could be as simple as, you're at a shift change brief and you're just like, hey, did you see that thing in the news? Or, did you see that patent was secured? Or did you see that, statement that was put out, or things like that, just so that airmen are kind of thinking bigger and having like that bigger picture. And then on top of that, I think there's so much to be said for being technically proficient and having lots of skills. And we were talking about all these super high sciences that just frankly go over my head, and hypersonics and all these big words. But I think there's also another piece that sometimes we miss, and that is reminding airmen what it is we're fighting for. And I know that sounds a little cliche, but remind airmen what it is we're fighting for and what it is we're fighting against. So when I think about the typical young airman, E4, maybe 22 years old or whatever, we didn't grow up in the generation that was scared of, worried about, or thinking about communism. We grew up thinking about terrorism. We watched our parents, go through this. We watched our, uncles fight it, we watched our siblings. And so when we're faced with another problem, if we were given kind of the strategic threat that says, hey, there's another terrorist organization, there's another Al-Qaeda, whatever it is, we can kind of envision what that's going to look like, right? We've watched it since like we've been born. But when we're given this sort of strategic mindset, this sort of higher level picture of go fight China, right? Or go deter China, or go stop the CCP or whatever. We don't really know what that means. I think honestly, if you ask, I would hope not in this room, but I think if you ask a lot of our peers just for a good definition of communism in general, I don't think they'd be able to really give you a good definition. And that's not to knock a lot of people. I don't think it's been part of our repertoire. It hasn't been in our conversations. So when we're given this kind of strategic level guidance or goals or objectives to, stop China, I mean, we've heard it in all of our briefings where they're like, this is going to be your fight. Good luck. But we don't really have that picture, and we haven't had that picture. So I would definitely say that moving forward, I think it's really important for enlisted to read, and then read some more, and to just watch the news and pay attention to what's going on, to watch what's going on in Hong Kong, to see what's happened in Venezuela, Nicaragua, to study history, to look at, kind of what's happening around the globe, and then to step it back into how that pertains to what they're doing every day on the job. Because as we've been talking about all these technologies, as airmen get more and more proficient in much more technical things, I think that's super important, but they can take those skills and go to Google. They can take those skills and go to Amazon. So what is to keep them staying in the military and using those skills, working long hours, staying late or whatever it is, pushing through the suck? Why would they do that with all of these skills, all of these certifications, all of these schooling that they've gone to? Why would they stay in the military? So that's something I'm kind of passionate about, but I just definitely think having those conversations with your airmen, and maybe not even in a teaching one-to-one sense, but just in a conversation, just bringing it up and, reminding them that China's an adversary. And, I think we're having those conversations obviously here at the academy and at those strategic levels, but bringing that down to the tactical and reminding airmen how the forecast you put out, or the aircraft that you check, or that briefing you give, or that step briefing, when you talk to the pilots, how that kind of impacts the bigger picture is, I think, pretty important. So I hope that kind of answers your question.
Yeah, absolutely it does. I mean, and if I start to think about the responsibilities that I imagine officers have, again, blue clothes here. If I start to think about the set of responsibilities, you have no shortage of work to do either as an officer, right? So rather than thinking about this as, say, an additional duty, I would really encourage you to think about it as an opportunity to promote not just awareness, but sense of purpose and kind of cohesion in your team. And for my money, I'd go on to suggest it can start low. For example, a room full of a lot of MSS folks, who has wasted more than 20 minutes on MSS reads when you should have done something else? Anybody? Yeah, that's kind of my point. But here's the trick. None of that was wasted. It just, you chose to spend your time in one valuable way when you could have done it another way, right? But that's an example of how you can build culture that consumes information that helps you identify your purpose, to situate your role, but also the role of your team. And now there's another thing I want to tell you here to justify doing that. And this speaks to what we do in the classroom as educators, largely our Miss Frizzle-led philosophy. Research suggests that if you structure a circumstance that allows someone to say something themselves, they're largely more likely to remember 70% of it. That's really high. And if you structure the situation that puts the individual in a moment to do something themselves, so my 298 classes, my research methods classes, well, they all know that I make you write repetitively on the whiteboards. Well, that's because I want you to do something. I think you're more likely to remember it. So there's ways to do this that promotes a sense of purpose and cohesion, but it's scientifically valid. Folks are more likely to remember it if they say it themselves than if they do it themselves. So I would put that on you as the Dr. B challenge to my new second lieutenants, right? How can you emulate MSS in your next environment to do this? So with that, Jake. So Jake, you said an interesting thing in your introduction. In effect, it's that nothing is changing, but everything is changing, right? So I want to push you on that a little bit more. Because what it really kind of suggests is that in some capacity, you are being well prepared for the role that you will embark on as a junior officer. But it also suggests that In some ways, you're not. And that's not anyone's fault in particular, because we want to have a proactive growth mindset. So Jake, kind of with that as the backdrop, what should we be doing to better prepare ourselves? Some elements of warfare aren't changing, but others are.
Right. So I'm a big believer in this institution being a personal leadership laboratory. Cadets will complain out the wazoo about how they don't get experience to lead, they don't have an opportunity to do this, they're not being allowed to make decisions. And that's true to a point. But what this institution does allow is for us as individuals to say, okay, I've been placed in an environment with all these resources. How am I going to go make the most of that? And it's that cliche phrase, you get in what you, or you get out what you put in. And I think that that's absolutely true. I'm not a believer in the idea that you will always be prepared for what you're going to be tasked with. I don't think I'll ever be prepared. And every little minor cadet wing position I've held, I've never felt prepared. But there is preparation that we all can do for ourselves. And I think it's ultimately our own responsibility, not the institutions, not our teachers. It's ours. And I think that there are 5 primary things. Yeah, I know I increased it. 5 main things that we can do to better prepare ourselves. And the first is, I'm going to piggyback off Michaela, is reading. Reading is lost on at least our generation, I think. Reading everything from like PME things, like Jocko. Jocko's great, right? Reading books like that, reading books about, personal memoirs of people in command or combat or something, all the way over to more academic style focuses on hypersonics, AI, but even things like, as future lieutenants, we're going to be dealing with airmen and people beneath us, reading things as far as the difficult subject of suicide, reading the academic stuff about that, like that whole gamut. I think we have a personal responsibility to educate ourselves on and read. That ties into number 2, which is reading doctrine. I learned about doctrine in 381 with Colonel Gospel and Colonel Swaim, and it was this kind of mysterious.
Jake, let me interrupt you. What is 381? What is the class name?
381 is essentially a class where cadets go in and they learn how to be an ABM. They learn how to fly, but mainly integrate with other aircraft.
An air battle manager.
Yes, sorry. Yeah, and mission plan. So when we think air warfare, I often used to think, and this is going back to the first question of how have I learned about future warfare? It's not just one airplane going in and conducting a mission. There's a stack of 15 to 30, you could say, aircraft that are all working together and integrating to go accomplish something. And how that all works and how you plan it and how you brief it, that's what's taught in 381. Along those lines, doctrine is included in this. And doctrine is that the best practices or the kind of the guidelines for how you operate. And the Air Force has, I don't know, 40 different doctrine books, you could say, booklets ranging from like 8 pages to like 300 pages. But there's like these cool little smart books on them and you can get smart on this stuff really, really quickly. And so I think it's really important to read Air Force doctrine in terms of agile combat employment. What is the doctrine on that? What is the doctrine on cyber warfare? What are these overarching guiding principles that now we're pulling tactics out of and actually employing? And then on top of that, what's the joint doctrine? The joint publications, all that type of stuff. So what is the Navy doing? What is the Army doing? How are we going to integrate with them? And understanding that big picture strategic view, I think is really crucial. So that's number 2. Number 3, sorry, this is a long answer. Number 3 is building relationships. Going back to people killing people, people leading people, this whole idea, it's all people based. And I think that when we're at an institution like this, or we're at a future base or something like that, it all depends on the relationships that we've built with each other. So whether that's a pilot with the security forces or the pilot with the maintainer or the intel with the pilot or whatever that combination is, relationships are crucial. So for a cadet, I think that the biggest value that, I'll just speak to this place, provides is the relationships that we build with one another. Like Nora's brilliant, and she's gonna, the crazy stuff she's doing with AOCs and all this cool stuff, like hopefully as someone who's going to fly eventually, I'll be working for whatever she's created, and that's sick. But having that connection later on down the road is instrumental and huge. And having that trust and relationship already built is really important. And that ties into number 4, which is being open to disruptive discourse. The idea that with the nature of warfare changing and moving into agile combat employment and in the new way in which we're doing air operations, such as an F-35 taking off on one island in the Pacific and landing at a totally different island where there's a fuel bladder so that it can refuel, and then it takes off somewhere else. And we're not having this central base anymore where we're just pumping out sorties. The whole way in which this is changing has to take creative thinking and ingenuity. And from what I've learned from talking with a lot of teachers is the old ways of the Air Force are moving to that obsolete realm. And so we need to be at the leading edge of creative thinking and disrupting the norm and the status quo. And that takes courage. It takes risking your position. It takes risking your people not liking this exercise that you're planning. Hey, guys, we're going to go do X, Y, and Z because this is where we're moving towards. And all the people that you're leading hate it because it's new and it's changed. We experience that here, right? How many people here hated Colex? Or like everyone, right? Because it's new.
Just that guy.
but I've actually talked with pilots who've been running exercises, F-35 pilots, who get out of their F-35, get handed an M4 and say, protect your aircraft. And yet here we are at the academy complaining about walking around with dummy rifles, learning, perimeter procedures and stuff like that, right? But there is a connection there. And so being open to disrupting the norm and the status quo through conversations, through discourse, and through relationships. And number 5, I think is very important, is physical fitness. And that's all I'm going to say on that.
So Jake, there are a lot of great connections there, right? It's kind of read widely, which we can think to mean read new, but also read civilian, read academic, read commentary, etc. We can think of read old / read current, and that's kind of what I think of the doctrine, right? If you want to critique the here and the now, you should probably have a good basis from which to do that. It might mean that you need to know something new. And one of the takeaways from this symposium for me is that change is hard, it's scary, it's difficult, but yet we need to be open to it, even though this system might not always reward it, at least not right away. Chenault was apparently the guy at Air Corps Tactical School that got it, and he got run out, right? So knowing that, it's really important that you have the knowledge and the relationships, that you know how to do it. And I'm going to translate physical fitness into you're prepared to do it yourself when push comes to shove if you have to. So Jake, I like that because it's really kind of nice for this notion of kind of turning the question into a king for a day question, right? So if Jake Hannes was king for a day, his first 5 edicts would be those things. Go read doctrine, manage your relationships, build them, keep them, treasure them, be open-minded to change, and be physically fit. And Jake says, listen to podcasts too, because why read when you can listen, right? So I'm going to flip it though. I'm going to flip it to the rest of you as also kind of king for a day. As an officer, you really do kind of have this challenge. The nature of warfare isn't changing, but perhaps the way it's conducted is, and you have a wide spectrum of folks in your networks that are prepared to do that and may not even see the why you're doing it. So now the 3 of you, king for a day. Jake gave us his 5. What's your list? King for a day, what's your list?
I'll only list one, so I'm going to keep it pretty short, but I would say that I think something that we really need to focus on is integration with the joint force a lot earlier. So that can be done personally, but also as an institution. That would be probably my number 1, because I know at least all the USAPA kids, like we had our contrails and we learned the other ranks, but we didn't really see that a ton. And fortunately for us, our department does have a lot of people from the joint force, but other than that, like I have not seen it in other locations. But as I've talked to officers and people who are in the active force right now, that's something that they've emphasized is they've worked all across the board. And we know that our future fight isn't going to be the Air Force alone. It's not just going to be us, It's not just going to be our aircraft. It's going to be an all domain type of thing, whether that's cyber, space, land, sea, and of course air, right? So I think that probably the most important thing, if I was king for a day, is that we'd focus on integration and exposing everyone to joint terminology and joint operations a lot sooner.
To that point, and again, this is me kind of outing myself, right? Captain in the Navy means something very different than captain in the Army, right? Oh my. And that's just a small one. So Bradley, what about you? King for a day?
Yes, sir. I think, I think Jake has some really great points, obviously, so I don't want to take too many away from him, but I think one thing to focus on is adaptability. I think, adaptability and critical thinking is such a huge skill that we need to learn quickly in order to be successful going forward as officers and as airmen and guardians or whoever. I think as a military as a whole, we need to focus on that. I think overall, I think this place does a decent job. But I think that's definitely such a focus item that we need to focus on going forward, is just that adaptability. Like, Jake mentioned agile combat employment and how we'll be using that within the Pacific Islands and such. And, that creates a lot of adaptability and being able to think on your feet and stuff like that. And so I think fostering those skills and thinking quickly and doing it now will be super beneficial for the military going forward.
I'm going to tweak the verbiage ever so slightly because you're saying adaptability, but what I really hear is a need to be comfortable making hard decisions very quickly with less than ideal circumstances. But if you've read, you can do it. Michaela?
Okay, so I think we all hate the phrase to piggyback, but since we're all piggybacking off of Jake, I will. So I'm a little biased being in the MSS department with all of the fabulous reads that Dr. B pushes our way. But I think it kind of just goes back to personal accountability and just choosing to push yourself on your own terms. I mean, you're going to be pushed like from leadership, from the situations you're in, but also like, don't let that be the only thing that pushes you. Like choose to go and work out, choose to do your own reading, choose to do your own research. And so I think that would probably just be the biggest thing to keep it short, is just challenging ourselves for the sake of challenging ourselves, not just because there's an external pressure.
So we're going to start to wind down now. We only have a few minutes left. So I have some easy ones. They're fixed responses. You kind of choose them. So the 2023 SWIC Symposium is largely focused on artificial intelligence, hypersonics, and quantum. Now, through either the lens of threats or opportunities, be decisive. I need you to rank those for me, either as threats or opportunities.
Okay, I guess I'll take it. So in my expert opinion on all three of these things, I would probably say artificial intelligence first, simply because we heard yesterday as they were speaking that this isn't going to, I think it was Dr. Martel was saying that this isn't going to replace the human element. You're not going to get rid of billets, that people are still always going to be involved. So again, I know very little on all three of these topics, but I would probably put artificial intelligence at the top, simply because if it's going to facilitate our processes and make us faster as humans, then to solve other huge problems like quantum anything or hypersonics, whether you see these as threats or as opportunities for us to kind of work in those realms. I think if we can work faster using AI or using machine learning, I would probably put that at the top of the list. Where quantum.
Number one opportunity then is AI. AI is our number one opportunity.
Yes, I would say that. Mm-hmm. And then where quantum and hypersonics, we could battle that to the death. I have no idea.
So folks, let's do it that way. What's your number one threat or opportunity from that list?
I guess I can go next. I would say my number one threat is also going to be AI, but for a different reason. So obviously we're all familiar, right, with deepfakes and the way that information can be altered. And I think that a lot of times information, we're starting to put a much larger emphasis on it. But if we can change the way a population thinks, that's as much of a threat, if not more, than a conventional weapon, for example. So if we can change the way an entire population is perceiving information, causing uprises, interacting with their allies, partners, and enemies, that's as much of a threat, I think. So that'd be my number one.
There's an opportunity here to plug Machiavelli and Sun Tzu, but instead I'm going to go with sum of all fears, which is in effect, why fight the fight yourself if you can make them fight each other? Absolutely. Bradley, and then over to Jake.
Yeah, I think one big thing, like I obviously don't want to piggyback off them too much about AI, so I'm going to shift it a little bit, but learning more about quantum computing, I think it has a huge, it's an opportunity in itself. Like there's the way we can, utilize quantum computing going forward is huge in the way we can operate and how, get things quickly and information quicker. And I think that's just a huge opportunity that if we can utilize that and get that done quicker and, utilize that to our advantage, I think that would be huge for our military going forward.
Jake?
So my uncle worked for the CIA for like 30 years, and he specialized in Chinese AI. And Chinese AI is by far the biggest threat.
With the exception of Bradley being polite, it really sounds like everybody is identifying AI as the #1 threat and opportunity. So for those 298ers and future 298ers, there's a topic. But folks, under 3 minutes left, and we're gonna do kind of the one phrase question response. So all I'm looking for is a phrase, just one. SWIC 2023 is focused again, AI, hypersonics, and quantum. SWIC 2024 should focus on fill in the blank. And we'll go right down the line. So Nora, whenever you're ready.
The Arctic.
PRC.
Who we are.
Keeping the military apolitical.
So folks, there's only 2 minutes left, but rather than turn it over to a Q&A that will invariably run over time, which I am vehemently opposed to, I am going to set them up over there near the collaboration rooms as sacrificial lambs. And if you want to talk to them, they're all yours. Folks, thank you for joining us. Thank you for your time and attention. I know you could be somewhere else.
All right, don't leave the stage, guys. Hold on, come on back. While we get ready to take a quick 10-minute break and everybody cycles in and out, we just do have a couple gifts for our panel members. So let me run over there and grab those and we'll hand them out. All right, guys, 2-minute warning. Please start making your way down to your seats and let's fill into the front, guys. Help me out here. Everybody sitting in the back, let's move forward a little bit, please. Thanks. Don't everybody move at once. Two minutes. Yep, 2 minutes, guys. All right, unless you have to leave for some reason in the next hour, if you're going to be hanging out on the wings, I appreciate if you guys come down and have a seat in the auditorium. Thank you. All right, we'll go ahead and reconvene and get started. Well, first, I just want to say, though, thanks again to Dr. B and the cadet panel. It was kind of nice to just kind of take a pause and kind of bring it into the huddle and kind of bring it back into the MSS family that's here, and appreciated that kind of back and forth for us to really kind of see where we're going as a department, the kind of critical thinking that we are applying to these problem sets, and the question of how do we lead into the future. What I'd like to do now is turn this over to Major Melissa McLean, who's going to introduce our next guest speaker. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I would like to introduce Miss Patricia Zarodkiewicz, also known as Miss D. So don't worry, you can call her Miss D instead of remembering how to pronounce her last name. Miss D was the administrative assistant to the Secretary of the Air Force, which is the Air Force's senior career civilian advisor to the Secretary of the Air Force. She performed high-level assignments following the Secretary's policies, goals, and objectives. She oversaw the execution of the U.S. Air Force Headquarters portfolio with an annual budget of $5.6 billion and 37,000 personnel. While being in the position of SAF AA, Ms. D also was the senior security official for the Air Force, the senior transition official for the Obama-Trump administration transition, and the acting undersecretary for 3 months. I had the opportunity to meet and seek advisement from Ms. D while she was SAF AA and I was in the Rapid Capabilities Office. Ms. D always took the time to truly listen to me, and we share a common interest in horseback riding. Thank you, ma'am. In retirement, Ms. D runs her own consulting company, is on the board of trustees for the Aerospace Corporation, a board member of 3 other private companies, and is a member of the Defense Business Board. She also was in the Pentagon for a total time of 25 years, right, ma'am? So if that says anything, I'll turn it over to Ms. D for her topic today.
All right. Well, thanks, everybody, and thanks again for the invitation. The sessions I've seen so far have been fascinating, and I'm going to try to bring some linkages with some of the briefs that you've had in the last day and a half with what we're going to talk about. And a special thanks to Melissa for inviting me to do this and wanting to talk about sort of some of the softer skills and some of the things that we're going to touch on today. But before I go into that, let me do a shout out to General Lorenz and General Miller, 2 of my best compatriots in the Pentagon, on, some very tough days. We were there post 9/11, which was, a difficult time for the nation and a really hard time in the money world. So I'm going to go to the next slide. Just a quick outline of what we're going to talk about. And I know you've had a brief already on sort of the history of warfare and historical examples, but I wanted to put these up there to sort of, get that foundational thought of the world changes all the time. How we deal with the technology, how the institutions have to deal with it, and how you as leaders have to deal with it changes. I mean, crossbows go back to the Middle Ages. And it dramatically changed how wars were fought and won. And when you combine that with horses, Genghis Khan ruled Asia. Totally different ways of not just creating something, but combining it with things that you already have in your portfolio, whether it's technical or from a leadership standpoint. We talked quite a bit about hypersonics yesterday. Hypersonics was an R&D program when I was an intern in 1985. I funded that program. And yet, here we are, we're still testing. It's 40 years later. If the Air Force and the nation had had more persistence in our recognition of a future threat and of that capability, would it have taken us that long? There's clearly some physics in that, but there's really a lot of things about the institution, how we saw threats and what we did. We were totally focused on Russia in the Cold War, and then we swung into the taking the wall down and the world kind of being a nicer place, and then going into counterterrorism. And now we're back looking at a near peer adversary that takes a whole of nation approach to every dollar they spend on industry, academia, and their defense base. And they're incredibly powerful because of that connection. So one of the challenges you all will have is how do you drive that connection as you look at policy and ethics of warfare? I wanted to talk a little bit about GPS as well, because GPS was first launched in 1978. That was the year I graduated from high school. Your parents weren't even born then. I mean, if you think about that. And there's not a single one of us in this room that doesn't touch GPS today. And it's not just from a military standpoint. It's the banking industry. It's every interstate commerce. It's every piece of the supply chain that moves around the world uses that technology. And it's so persistent that we don't think about it. It's just always there. So to be ready for what happens if it's disrupted, we've had to do exercises about what's a day without GPS. And it was frightening because there are things that the institution no longer knew how to do. There were days when the phones went out and people didn't have a Rolodex anymore. And because they didn't have a computer, they didn't know how to call somebody. So what's your backup to the backup? And how do you make sure that you're building in the TTPs so that you're capable of the old stuff and comfortable with the new stuff? So this one is something I find really, really interesting. And so if there's say 100 of us in the room, this curve is representative of the population at large. So who got the new iPhone the first week it was out? Raise your hand. Surprising. But if you think about who you are, where are you on this curve? Because you are finding your leadership footprint and style based upon how you see innovation. And you might be an early adopter, but your airmen, your guardians, the civilians you work with, your bosses may not be there. So how do you lead them through that? And how do you sort of find your way? Because in my personal life, I'm kind of here. I'm maybe in the early majority about things. Institutionally, I was an early adopter. General Lorenz, as one of my past bosses, generally found that a little uncomfortable because we were pushing to get some things implemented, simple things like robotic processing, so that budget analysts like I was growing up could learn to do things more strategically and focus on the support our decision makers needed and not making a spreadsheet work. So when you think about every squadron, every delta, every division in the Pentagon, if this is the people that you're dealing with, how do you bring them all along to your common goal and to meet the national security objectives of the nation? Because if everybody's an innovator, that's disruptive. But if everybody's a laggard, you're not going to take those disruptive technologies and incorporate them into the way we fight and win wars and how we think about them from a deterrent standpoint. So 15% of this room will be on that far end of the curve. Is that where you think you are? And what do you need to change when your squadron commander is here as a late majority person, uncomfortable with change, uncomfortable with the idea of teaching young airmen how to use hypersonic weapons and bring that into an AOC environment, so that you think about all of those soft factors that you need so that you communicate to that full range of folks and get them to move with you. Because the folks at this end, if you can get them to not be a dead weight, you might be successful. If you can get them to be neutral, that's good. But if you got to be kicking them, dragging and screaming so that your organization, you as a leader, is successful, how do you communicate with them? How do you convince them that you're on a good path? And that was something that, particularly in that last job, working with a lot of classified programs that were pushing the edge. And you didn't always know everything. So how do you trust the data? We've talked a lot about that. Because I might come up with a great idea as an innovator, but I need everybody else to be able to institutionalize that idea. I need someone to validate the requirement. I need somebody to go build it in the lab. I got to have an acquirer. I have to have a sustainer. And I need everyone to be able to push in that same direction and to get that broad spectrum of population to go with you is the only way that you can really drive institutional change and adoption of brand new technology. And we talked earlier about some of the things that the special ops community can do, because by nature, small teams, lots of trust, the ability to innovate, a different acceptance of risk. But how do you scale that when you think about the Space Force or the Air Force, or bigger, joint and coalition warfare? And that becomes really, really hard. And it's a lot of evolutionary change as long as you're moving in that disruptive direction. And it can be big steps or small steps. So one of the things that I wanted to talk about, and whether it's bureaucracy or a squadron or a wing, you've got to be able to understand an awful lot of subjective elements to be able to be successful in where you want your organization to go. And you're constantly going to have to reassess your leadership perspectives so that you build that knowledge and apply it differently with a very agile and quick changing focus, so that you're adapting to not just what your organization is, but what your leaders, your bosses and your bosses' bosses want. Because as we talked in the last group, it's all about the national strategy and fighting and winning the nation's wars. But everybody's in a stovepipe and everybody has different ways to be successful. So understanding whether or not, again, it's the squadron level or in the Pentagon, understanding those institutional roles and responsibilities of who's there to help. How do I bring the knowledge of somebody else into this organization to help me make better decisions? And in some cases, go and convince the chief and the secretary that they need to make a decision to support a technology that maybe you developed, or you figured out how to use in a war game differently and you want to prove it. There's somebody there who can say yes, but there's always more people who can say no. So how do you work around them? How do you bring them with you? And understanding those institutional requirements and roles, who is the decision maker? Where are they on that innovation curve? Are they comfortable with disruption? If so, you've got someone who's risk acceptant, but if they're on that other end of the curve, how do you make them comfortable that it's a risk that's worth their choice and the nation's? So building relationships and trust is a huge, huge part of that. We talked about it last night sitting at the bar, because it's all about the people that you challenge yourself with, that you communicate with, that you partner with and fight with bureaucratically and in real, to figure out who can help you get to that goal and to make those leaders lean forward and make the right decisions. And it is about data. Some of it's very hard data. It's fact-based, but a lot of it's going to be subjective. When do you know enough? And getting to, risks and rewards. And if my boss is not risk acceptant, who else can help change that equation? Sometimes it's their exec, sometimes it's their golf buddy, sometimes it's a spouse. It could be anybody that they communicate with. So how do you influence that other person to support your idea? And so it's got to be a big 360. And Melissa had a lot of experience with that in the Pentagon, because if you didn't have joint staff support, if you didn't have OSD, you didn't have the guy with the money, you didn't have the contracting vehicle, it was a great idea that wasn't going to go anywhere. And it doesn't turn into capability if it doesn't have those other things. Plus, rules of law and lots of lawyers and congressional support. So it's, you have to think about all of that, but I'm going to touch on this because everybody sees risk charts. But when I come to leading in this environment, you know, you always want to be low and medium risk. But when you're doing the really, really hard things that you all are going to do, you're going to be playing in the orange and red. And that's not just from a technical standpoint, it's from a leadership standpoint and an institutional standpoint. And it means that it's high risk for you as a leader and as a decision maker or as an influencer. So there was an occasion in my last job, special access program, and the Secretary of the Air Force was the deciding authority. She was the only one who could decide. And we went through all of the analysis. We went through all the coordination. We visited every stakeholder who was read in, still a small group, got the vice chairman, got to all the right people who could say yes or could say no. When they could say no, how did we mitigate their concerns? We spent a lot of time working to reduce the risk. But ultimately, I'm sitting in her office with a piece of paper to say, you have to decide this. And here's all the things we've done to mitigate risks and concerns and to make this as sound a decision as you can make. And she asked me, what happens if this goes wrong? You'll be fired. My career will be over. That's a different risk perspective. So everything I did was to help reduce it. But ultimately, as the decision maker, she was the one who had to sign that piece of paper to do something outrageously cool that was usually successful for a mission. And she did it at great personal risk. You all will be in that decision. You'll be in that space more than once, whether it's going to be on an operation or on a bureaucratic thing. Because as your careers progress, you'll have to be making those decisions or convincing someone else, like I did, that it was the right thing to do. And I was convinced from my career, that was a good risk to take. It was that important. But I also worked with a lot of people I trusted. I validated the data. I talked to experts about technologies and operations that I had no experience in. So I was learning to reduce the risk all the time. But somebody still has to do it. And that'll be all of you. So we talked a little bit about time as we went through some of the other discussions. And everybody does the OODA loop. But there's an innovation one that changes it to observe, question, experiment, and take advantage. This is what Dr. Sega talked about. Why aren't we doing this faster? So what's the role of time that you have as a leader? What do you speed up and what do you slow down? How do you get more data? If you make that observe piece of it too big, you might be constraining your decision space and your time to act. And then your risk goes up. Or it could go down. You don't know. How do you capture all of that information? And so I think about this one a lot when I think about new technology, because it is more about what am I learning? How am I taking advantage of what I've learned so that I now focus on the things that I don't know? And, it's kind of an interesting model to think about. And I want to talk, before we get to some of the change management piece, just about competencies. Because as leaders, you're always assessed on everything you do, everything you say, the things you don't say, how you behave with others. And again, across that full spectrum of who's out there on your team or not, and what do they do? So when I think about the leaders that I felt really strongly about, I mean, not just knowledgeable, but they were incredibly strong communicators. They could adapt to the environment. They were strategically focused, but tactically very agile. And they learned every day. Every day. And you heard a lot of discussion about reading. Read every day. Sometimes junk, because your brain needs to do that too. But what is that all about? And that was one of the things I wanted to ask Major McLean, because she worked for some really incredibly strong leaders in her last couple of roles. So what are those competencies that she found most important being at a younger point in her career?
Yes, ma'am. So I was a captain when I was working at the Pentagon. I rarely wore my uniform because I was meeting with people that way outranked me. So it went a lot better if they didn't know I was a captain. I didn't introduce myself as a captain. I dressed to mirror their dress. But what my best boss, I still call him my best boss, was from that assignment. And he led by example every single day. Like there was never a moment in time where I was like, why did you do that? I don't understand. Like your character, I'm questioning his character every single day, 100%. And he was one of those people that if we joke that if he like lost his left arm, he'd be like, oh, it's fine. I write with my right hand. You know, like he was that optimistic. The other part of it is curiosity. Curiosity about what you're doing and that passion, but also curiosity to learn about the people that you're working with and pour into those people, right? You're in this leadership role. You can do little with the people if you're prioritizing tasks, but really pouring into those people. And then letting me fail, but providing feedback is the last thing. So those three traits are really what made him my best boss, and all the things that I learned from working for him, I use every single day still.
And he was also relentlessly pursuing his goal. And there were roadblocks all the time. So how to be agile enough to get around those roadblocks, how to, again, build a coalition of people that were willing to support, and frankly, how to marginalize the ones that were in the way. And we did that all the time.
Yes, ma'am.
To try to drive, again, getting an organization that wasn't comfortable with change, ready to adapt. And I'm sure most of you have seen that Simon Sinek's talk about why. And you've already heard a bunch of briefers in the last 2 days talk about communicating the why from a strategic level. Why am I doing this? Why am I wanting this technology? How I'm going to apply it is really important, and how, you know, the what of organize, train, equip, getting the right people to do things. But if I couldn't tell why I needed to make those resource decisions, it was going to be really difficult. And as you find, a lot of things in the DoD, it's about resources. It's about how you as airmen spend your time. It's about how much manpower and money gets applied to every single problem. So why one alternative is better than the other makes a big difference in getting institutional support. But moving the culture to move with that strategy was a relentless task. In my last job, I had with contractors about 3,000 folks that work for me around the world. and when I look at that innovation curve, I did have 2.5%, and they were fascinatingly crazy, brilliant minds. And they still had to convince the laggards to use a different system, to provide intelligence to a tactical user in a different way, to take AI and turn it into targeting information. Still have a human in the loop to make the decision, but to help with the targeting, to use AI and ML. And we always had to go back to, why am I doing this? Because analysts in the Intel world were spending way too much time tracking a truck across the desert, not getting to the root of who the evil person was and where they were and how to get to them. So this whole quote about, culture eating strategy for breakfast was just persistent in the Pentagon. It's not always a whole lot different in the field, but you have a little bit less, people weighing on top of you. But you have to be able, as a leader, to talk about why. And to that full range. So it's going to be, a first-term airman. It might be a civilian older than your mom and dad, who's been in the same job for 30 years, doing it the exact same way. And you're going to move their cheese. So I had to learn to tell stories differently to the innovative group about what they could do, but also to the laggards about why institutional change and the acceptance of technology was important. It was really, really hard. I mean, it took just nonstop thinking about who, what, where, but the why. So, Melissa, more thoughts?
I think whoever your audience is, right, realize how much time they have or what level of detail they want to understand about your why, right? Because your why might be really exciting to you. They might be like, oh man, you've got 30 seconds. So you have to be able to tailor your message to various levels of detail and various timestamps as well. So make sure that you're practicing. It's much harder to explain an idea in 30 seconds than it is in 5 minutes. So you want to be practicing that constantly with everything you're doing. Here's a great opportunity, right? There's all these faculty around. You can be like, I'm going to give you my 30-second pitch. I'm going to give you my 5-minute pitch, right? And just make that a habit so you get that muscle memory down.
Yeah, and time is such an important variable. And in an environment now where we have so much information.
Yes.
What's relevant? What's not? What do I trust? Who do I trust giving it to me so that the speed of the decision is appropriate to what you know, but also to what you don't know? And are you comfortable with what you don't know? I mean, there was never a decision I was uncomfortable making, but I had to learn to slow down so that sometimes I might know more in 20 minutes that would dramatically change the risk of this decision. And that was worth it. But if it meant that 20 minutes, the chief was walking to Congress and telling, some misinformation, that's too late. Then you got to go with what you know. And so how you use time as a leadership factor is really something that took a while to accommodate, not just in the Pentagon bureaucracy, but in my own decision-making style, so that you don't always rush to make quick judgments. But there's so much disinformation out there now. How do you assess that? How do you get to the ground truth of the data so that you make a good decision and good recommendations for you as a leader and for you as a part of a bigger institution? So lots of challenges. So the technology, there's a great quote from Christensen. that disruptive technology is not about technology, it's about marketing. And marketing is telling stories to get people to do the things that you want. It's a weird way to look at it from a leadership perspective. But I was good at things because I could tell people stories that they could believe in, and they would support me because of that. So yeah, I have a degree in political science. I'm not a marketing expert, but I certainly learned a lot that way. And that piece of it made hard resource decisions more acceptable because we told the why, we told why it was important, we told how how it would affect them. And I could talk about the risk that was for me as well. And so being able to get to that sort of rounded discussion made it much more powerful. So I've talked way too long. We need some questions so we can hear what's important to you.
And we do have about 5 minutes left.
Okay. I was watching that clock.
Got a cue from.
Hello, ma'am. Cadet third class, Liam Champagne, Squadron 13.
Awesome.
I would like to ask, how do you foresee young, ambitious leaders posing questions to their leadership and making change?
That's a great question. That's one of those where time and place is important. And General Lorenz will laugh about this. I'm not a morning person. So if someone came to me with a super creative, high-risk idea at 7:30 in the morning, man, you put yourself way at risk. You came to see me at 4:30 in the afternoon. I made time. I had brain power. I was much more creative. All of those people were successful. So if you asked my exec when you should come see me, if they liked you, they'd say, go see her in the afternoon. If they didn't, they'd say, oh, first thing in the morning, and you'd be shot down. So some of it is knowing the right questions to ask, knowing when to ask them so that they're receptive and they have the brain power and the time to give you thoughtful consideration. Your boss's style, I want that discussion walking down the hallway. Other ones, I had to give them a piece of paper the day before, let them stew on it overnight, and then I could go in and have a really robust discussion. So you got to know you, and you got to know your boss, and that piece of time. But there's always a way. So don't ever give up when you have the good question. You just might have to find 3 or 4 different vectors to get it there. And sometimes it's through a surrogate. So I usually knew if I couldn't articulate the question in the way that my boss was going to understand it, but the vice chief can, let them carry that question in. Because it was more important to get the answer than for it to come from me. So, awesome question. All right, anybody else?
Gospel Director of Strategy and Warfare Center. Question for you from your experience, really at the Pentagon, all that time that you spent there. Elon Musk made the comment that we are inherently, as the DoD, behind the curve when it comes to innovation.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a big believer in our corporate structure, our DoD structure, et cetera. Do you believe that is basically adversarial or complementary to innovation and disruptive technologies? And if there was something you could change, what would that be?
I would definitely change the whole PPBE process because it takes too long. And it's easy to be risk acceptant when budgets are going up. It was when budgets were coming down that we became more risk adverse, harder to invest in disruptive technology because you still had, thousands of airmen to pay for, bases to run. That infrastructure cost was so high. But we also have to change the risk reward piece, because I found, again, particularly in the classified world, I could drive quicker decisions, faster to deploy opportunities because I had a smaller decision chain. Still had approval authorities, but I had a smaller decision chain. And because of that, we could go faster. Still had acquisition hiccups and the usual things. But I also had less chatter that I had to deal with. And I didn't have to always find a way to, quell someone's angst, who may or may not be relevant, but they could be disruptive in that. So we didn't always reward the people that worked really hard on those high disruptive processes and decisions. And because the process itself is so slow, you don't go through it fast enough so that people can learn and fail and learn, and the institution can move quickly with it. So yeah, are we as agile as we could be? No. Do we make thoughtful, strategic decisions? Yes. There's a lot of things like with AI and ML and visualization that we could do to make the decision maker's time better spent. And that requires an investment and a change in decision culture. And also telling some people to just sit down and color. You don't need to really play in this decision. And we're an inclusive institution, and we don't like to do that. But in some areas I could. And we were really good at it when we did. So he's a little bit right, but he also doesn't have 535 stakeholders on the Hill who vote on what his disruptive ideas are. And they do that for DoD. And we have to be conscious of that. We're spending taxpayer dollars, not shareholder dollars. And so that's part of the why of how we have to approach those decisions. But yeah, should we be more risk acceptant? Absolutely.
Well, thank you, ma'am, so much for your time. We've really appreciated your insights and great conversation we had. We have a small gift as a token of our appreciation. It's a Toronto marble piece, and we just thank you on behalf of the Strategy Warfare Center and the MSS department. Let's give Ms. Zarodkiewicz a warm round of applause. All right, ladies and gentlemen, quick in-place stretch break. We are about to have our distinguished speaker come on stage, Miss Skeen, Miss Tanya Skeen. And so if you're coming in, please come on in and fill in. If you need to leave, expedite, but make sure we fill in the seats, please. Thank you. All right, if you're coming in, please fill in from the front. Thank you. Come on in. My cadets on the wings, please, I ask that you come on down into the audience. Come on down. Come on in, guys. Just have a seat. Come on down, guys. Come on, Kat. Let's go. All right, as people continue to make their way down to the audience, I'm going to begin our introduction. Please continue to file in and find your seats. I would like to introduce our next distinguished speaker, Ms. Tanya Skeen, SES, Assistant Secretary of Defense for Acquisitions. Ms. Tanya M. Skeen, a career member of the Senior Executive Service, is currently performing the duties of Assistant Secretary of Defense for Acquisitions. In this position, she advises the Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition and Sustainment, the Deputy Secretary of Defense, and the Secretary of Defense on matters relating to the Department of Defense acquisition system, acquisition program management, and the development of strategic space intelligence, tactical warfare, command and control, and business systems. Ms. Skeen most recently served as Executive Director of the F-35 Lightning II Joint Program Office. She was responsible for acquiring and delivering DoD's affordable and sustainable fifth-generation strike aircraft and the F-35 Global Sustainment Strategy for 3 U.S. services in 7 partner countries. Prior to that, she served as the Program Executive Officer of the Army Rapid Capabilities Office. In this position, Ms. Skeen was responsible for expediting the fielding of critical combat capabilities to the warfighter and enhancing material responses to meet combatant commander needs. Ms. Skeen also served as Deputy Director of Test and Evaluation, Headquarters U.S. Air Force, where she was responsible for policy, resource, and oversight of development and operational testing, and the Air Force Head of Foreign Material Acquisitions and Exploitation. A native of Kent, Ohio, Ms. Skeen was commissioned in the U.S. Navy in 1990 following graduation from Purdue University, where she earned her Bachelor of Science degree in Aeronautical and Astronautical Engineering. In the Navy, she served as Technical Instructor and Assistant Director at the Nuclear Power Training Command and received her Master's of Science in Mechanical Engineering at the University of Central Florida. After leaving the Navy, Ms. Skeen held numerous private sector positions in engineering and flight test of air, space, and ground weapon systems. She is the recipient of the David Packard Excellence in Acquisitions Award, the Purdue University Distinguished Engineering Alumni Award, and the Purdue University Outstanding Aerospace Engineering Award, along with the Joint Civilian Service Achievement Award and numerous others. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Ms. Skeen.
Thanks. Appreciate it. Hi, good morning. I think it's still morning. I'm still on Washington, D.C. time, so you'll have to forgive me. Can you hear me okay? All right, great. Thank you, Colonel Grant, for your introduction. I am very excited to be at the Air Force Academy again. I think my first visit to the Air Force Academy was in 1989, where my then boyfriend, Cadet Skeen, brought me out to visit the beautiful Colorado area. And now, a few years later, it looks a lot different. I then married that cadet, spent a long time following him around the country as I ended my Navy career and followed him around in his Air Force career for 30 years. In that time, I've gotten to do a lot of interesting things, as was mentioned in the intro. But never probably as exciting as maybe leading the F-35 program, which we can talk a lot about in the Q&A if you are interested. But today, what I'm going to talk to you about, at least in my opening remarks, is what we are doing in acquisition in the Department of Defense. I am sure other speakers have made clear over the last 2 days that we are facing unprecedented national security challenges in every single domain. And both the President and Secretary Austin have pointed out that we are in a decisive decade that will set the terms of global strategic competition. This is an exciting time for those of you preparing to commission into the strongest force in the world.
My job is to make sure that you have all of the equipment, training, and capabilities that you need to defeat our adversaries. You will be at the forefront of some of the most important decisions our military has made in decades, directly moving the needle forward to strengthen deterrence and build enduring advantages long into the future. This morning, I want to discuss where the department is heading in the acquisition world, both for some of the specific systems you've been focused on throughout the symposium, but also more broadly on the impacts our acquisition professionals have on a daily basis around the world. Throughout my career in uniform, industry, and now civilian service, I've seen a number of changes in the way DoD approaches acquisition in response to the threat at hand. After years of focusing on operations conducted by violent extremist organizations, we now face a more complex security environment. The People's Republic of China remains our pacing challenge, while Russia continues to pose an acute threat, as evidenced by their unprovoked invasion of Ukraine about a year ago. Our adversaries are not waiting for us. Across all domains, they are constantly seeking to outcompete and out-innovate us. For those of us in the acquisition world, this is our call to action every day. We are charged with weaving together the right mix of capabilities to defend against current and future threats, and undertaking reforms to get technology we need more quickly. If this sounds like a daunting task, it is. I will assure you that the DoD's largest acquisition program, the F-35, there is nothing more rewarding than seeing current cutting-edge technology making it into the hands of our warfighters, into the airspace, and onto the battlefield. To be successful in our constantly evolving security environment, it is critical that we continue assessing, adapting, and improving the way we design, develop, produce, procure, and sustain capabilities. I'm going to focus on 4 key areas that drive what we are doing in acquisition. The first is flexibility. Flexibility in our end-to-end processes, as well as the way we think about and tackle a problem. I'll use an example that hopefully you can all relate to. Hopefully my words are not too dated. Say that you are in the market for a new cell phone, a last-minute cleaning service for a pop-up Sammy, and that new car you've waited 2 years to put in a parking spot. For the phone, a new model is going to come out every year. You go to the nearest wireless carrier or the Apple store, maybe wait in line on release day, and it's relatively a quick, easy process to get that new phone in your hand. It even updates all the data right there, and you're not even sure how that actually happened. For that last-minute cleaning service, however, it's a little more complicated. You'd probably have to Google a few options, set up a phone call to decide first, can they get on base? What do you want them to do? Dust, vacuum, both, whatever. When do they have to get there? And then agree on a price. For that new car, however, maybe more complicated yet. You have all of the manufacturing and assembly line that happened before you're ever even in the market for the car, but then throw in safety testing before it leaves the factory, a few test drives for yourself to make sure you've got the right one, securing some financing, which I know they make kind of easy, but it's still a lot of paperwork or maybe electronic work, and now you've got the bank loan. So you obviously don't go through the same steps to procure that cell phone as you do that cleaning service or the new car. Imagine if you did, you would probably find yourself buying fewer of those new cell phones. So you can probably imagine, if I take that analogy, that this difference is only magnified if I'm going to acquire a new F-15EX. versus say launching a satellite into space where I have to buy the satellite and the launch from either SpaceX or someone else. My point is, it doesn't take a one-size-fits-all approach in acquisition. We need to have our approach that is originally intended for large, exquisite acquisitions like an F-35 is very different than if we want to buy an app or a smaller thing to field to the battle space. So our military acquisition professionals, they have to think creatively and innovatively when it comes to developing the business and the technical strategies matched to the specific capability that we are buying. And we work hard from a policy perspective to ensure that we have the right tools for that flexibility. You may have heard of the E7 Wedgetail program. For example, they are buying an off-the-shelf Boeing 737 to accelerate the development and fielding of airborne early warning and control capability. So rather than, for example, what we did on F-35, where we started with a clean sheet, did a lot of technical demonstrators, down selected to a single airplane, and then 20 years later, we are fielding them to the battlefield. The E7 Wedgetail will come much more quickly. It will have greater reliability and availability than the aging E3 Sentry, allowing a smaller number of aircraft to accomplish the mission. This is indeed not only an example of working with international allies, because the E7 Wedgetail started with Australia, but creative thinking to get capability to the field faster. That brings me to flexibility was number one. The next attribute I'm going to talk about in terms of acquisition is speed. From the rollout of the B-21 Raider last month to the Missile Defense Agency's Hypersonic Glide Phase Interceptor to Space Development Agency's National Defense Space Architecture, our nation's innovation and ingenuity remain unparalleled, and we have to keep it that way. Our adversaries are investing more into R&D than ever before and fielding fierce capabilities of their own. To pace the threat, we have to be able to provide our warfighters with next generation capabilities at a speed that is meaningful on the battlefield. How can we leverage commercial products to accelerate the development of military specific systems or advances in high-powered computing and digital engineering to iterate and test more rapidly, or the R&D efforts of our allies and partners? Historically, we've failed sometimes to get out of our own way when it comes to going fast. And frankly, sometimes our policies are our problem. Requirements to begin an acquisition program often focus on systems rather than capability, inhibiting innovation and incentivizing predictability over creativity. Budget processes similarly have a bottoms-up nature, which can overemphasize low impact options at the expense of strategic issues. And inflexibility in our 2-year budget cycle can drive programmatic delays. Just look at how often a new iOS gets pushed out to the new phone you just bought. I'm pretty sure I got an update this week to update my phone, and it probably was about the 3rd one I've had this month. I don't send software that quickly to an F-35. Why not? While our needs in DoD are more complicated, my point is that it is possible to move faster, especially when it comes to software. And we're working hard to enable an acquisition culture that embraces speed. Take the Hypersonic Attack Cruise Missile, we call it HACM, for example. By building on years of cooperative research and development with our Australian allies, the program is accelerating capability delivery more than 2 years. Not only is HACM a milestone in the fielding of hypersonic weapons, but it is delivering capability that is relevant to the high-end fight of tomorrow. As the next generation of, I'm sorry, hang on one second. Let me start that sentence again. As the next generation of leaders, we need you to not be afraid to take risks in pursuing new ideas, using new tools, or fostering an environment where some degree of failure is okay and even encouraged. If you look throughout the Department of Defense, we have started a number of hypersonics programs. The Navy has one, the Air Force has one, the Army has one, and we need that innovation. We need to be able to see what will work, what won't work, and how do we get it to the field faster. That failure is not necessarily a bad thing, and we need to experiment. We learn more by iterating and end up saving time down the road by identifying our problems early on. Remember that innovation does not happen in a vacuum. It requires efforts across multiple cross-functional stakeholders and processes to all be in sync with one another. Our best acquisition strategies will get you nowhere without the requirements and the funding and exceptional technical design. So all of those communities have to work together if we're going to move from R&D to the battlefield with speed. So that was the second one, flexibility, speed. The third attribute I want to talk about is scale. Nowhere has this been more evident than what we've seen in Ukraine. If we end up leaving too many capability areas with only demonstrations of potential solutions, we are not actually fielding anything faster. Rapid technology demonstrations across the military and industry have moved the needle on some of our most advanced technologies. But what comes next transforms cool ideas and concepts and experiments into mass. When Chevy unveiled the brand new Corvette that you laboriously went through the process of buying, was that the end of its journey getting to your garage as well as thousands of other garages? Of course not. They had to establish assembly lines, build up a robust supply chain, develop the owners and mechanics manuals, and ship it to the local dealer, etc. The same goes for our platforms and weapons. If we don't have hot production lines for F-15EXs, GPS satellites, or B-21s, along with advanced interactive simulators to train the pilots, maintainers, and guardians, all we have is really expensive and well-engineered static displays. We must devote the same intellectual energy and resources to innovation in manufacturing and production, as we are to emerging technology design and prototyping. We also must be capable of iterative design, development, and production at speed, implementing digital models, engineering, artificial intelligence, and advanced manufacturing techniques. These are the elements of delivering at scale that will allow us to move faster than our adversaries. As the COVID pandemic and ongoing situation in Ukraine have taught us all too well, it is absolutely critical that we build the industrial capacity to deliver critical capabilities at scale. Every day, we deliver hundreds of thousands of weapons and equipment to the Ukraine armed forces. And for the first time in decades, we are seeing what a high volume fight looks like. Nearly every couple weeks, joint multidisciplinary teams around the world are developing security assistance packages for Secretary Austin to consider to Ukraine. Packages that have now reached more than 27 billion since the beginning of the invasion. To include the latest announcements you may have seen from President Biden on the M1 tanks. But for the last 50 years, we often prioritize the efficiency of just-in-time delivery, making it difficult to surge production, whether for N95 masks or complex munitions. The capabilities that we need to deter and, if necessary, defeat our adversaries cannot be produced overnight. Just in time equals just late. A typical munition, such as a javelin or stinger, takes upwards of 2 years to produce. And that's only if the supply chain is working seamlessly and the production line is hot. Simply put, we cannot quickly surge production in a crisis if we have not built a robust capacity to do so, which means we must prepare and invest in scale. Doing so requires close partnership and clear demand signals to defense industrial base, so we can make the right investments in raw materials, production tooling, and automation, as well as a workforce that can meet that production capacity demand. So flexibility, speed, scale, and the last piece I want to talk about is integration. When we can't just deliver the most advanced widgets at scale, having an F-35 fighter, for example, is not enough if it's not integrated into the way we do business on the battlefield. We must think about integration and build in resiliency to meet a pacing threat like China. To go back to my analogy from before, to successfully accomplish the task of getting that room cleaned on time, you needed your phone to look up and find that suitable cleaning company, a physical cleaner to provide the service, and a car to get money from the ATM to pay them. At least you used to need that last one. I can tell from my Dooley's bank account that Venmo works just fine these days. But you get the idea. Without any of those steps working together seamlessly, your room is still dirty and you're doing an extra ruck run. This is how we have to think about delivering capabilities as a system of systems that enable warfighters to complete the kill chain. It is not enough, for example, to deliver the world's best fighter across the US services and our partners and allies. That fighter must connect with ease to advanced multi-domain sensors, targeteers, and decision makers to deliver bad days to bad people. Only when we think about integrating system of systems holistically do we start achieving the desired effects on the battlefield. By broadening our thinking to include not just individual systems, but portfolios of seamlessly interoperable systems, can we directly align decision-making with operational needs? For example, if the development and delivery of a piece of software is behind schedule on the Space Development Agency's tracking and transport layers, a capability portfolio assessment helps us determine the impact that that simple delay will have on a range of systems critical to a mission kill chain. Opening the aperture to look at second and third order effects, all through the lens of a specific mission, allows us to go beyond delivering a really sick fighter and instead integrated suites of capabilities that are collectively stronger than the sum of their parts. So what does all that mean to you? When he took office as Secretary of Defense, Secretary Austin laid out his concept for integrated deterrence, which is built upon developing and combining our strengths to maximum effect by working seamlessly across warfighting domains, theaters, the spectrum of conflict, other instruments of US national power, and our unmatched networks of allies and partners. Realizing this vision requires all of us, the department, industry, and academia, working together to tackle the enormity of the problem set. As our military's next generation of leaders, you will be at the forefront of this decisive decade. We will need you to consistently come forward with your innovative ideas to improve processes and capabilities, or even streamline the way we do business as a department. As you get out into operational units and move up in your career, stay in touch with the airmen and guardians at the tip of the spear. Listen to the challenges and problems they are having in executing the mission, and never stop learning. Remember that flexibility, speed, scale, and integration are key. Our security environment is evolving more rapidly than ever, and it will be critical that we consistently find ways to keep improving. All it takes is turning on the news to remind us that good now may not be good enough for the future. Our people are undoubtedly our greatest comparative advantage, and if the US is going to be prepared to compete and win, in light of the challenges we face, you will personally need to make the difference. Thank you again for this opportunity to be here with you, and I'm happy to take questions.
Good morning, ma'am. I'm Cadet Second Class Reverend May from Cadet Squadron 26. My question to you is, we've been told by the Chief of Staff and everyone else that we need to learn to accept failure and challenge the status quo and innovate or accelerate change or lose. What is the DoD doing to incentivize taking those failures, right? Because if 4 out of the 5 people take that risk, but that one person plays it safe, those 4 people fail, that one person is now ahead. So what is the DoD doing to incentivize taking those risks to not affect promotion?
Okay, so what I will do is I'm gonna change your question just a little. And I don't want to be a politician about that. But when I think about failing fast or not penalizing those that have taken those risks, I focus on usually the acquisition programs that take more risk. So if you think about what I was saying on our hypersonics programs, I don't know how closely you're tracking those, but a number of those, in fact, I'm pretty sure all of them, did not start out with successful tests. In fact, they were colossal failures. The program managers did enjoy coming to tell me why it was still a success. They were colossal failures. And so what would you expect might happen after that occurred? You could usually expect the program manager to be removed. You could usually expect Congress to take money away from the program. And you could usually expect that at least some portion of them would be canceled entirely. None of those things happened. So when we talk about having the ability to accept risk and to accept failure on that broad scale, the program managers weren't fired. The program managers, in fact, several of them continue to get promoted and do quite well. I think I saw one on the BG Select list that just got released this week. So that's not happening. We are, and Congress didn't take the money, and Congress didn't cancel the programs because we need these capabilities. We need to lean forward. We need to experiment with things that may not work out. We need to understand that quickly, adjust, and get better. And that's exactly what we're seeing in our hypersonics programs. I hope that was helpful. Sure.
I'm Colonel Gospel, Director of Strategy and Warfare Center. We've heard from academia that we need to go faster. We've heard from industry, we need to go faster. We've heard from DoD, SESs, all the way across the board, we need to go faster. What is the one thing that is holding us back from going faster when everyone wants to go faster?
Okay, that's a great question. I will say I don't think it's one thing. Number one, we always have a limited budget, right? And so that is one thing that we spend time on. And what I mean by that is where do you need to go faster and where do you apply resources to those problems to enable you to go faster? So in one case, I will say that we have limited budgets. We cannot likely go faster in every single area because in a lot of ways that is driven by resources. So resources have to be there. The other piece I will tell you is that I think we are going faster. I think that we see just countless areas, particularly in the Air Force, where we are indeed going faster. When I look at the Space Development Agency, for example, that is leveraging what commercial is doing in space and taking those satellites to build an entire architecture of tracking and transport satellites, that's never been done before in our Air Force. So there's a key area where we're going faster. I mentioned hypersonics. I'm looking at what we did with the F-15EX, similar to what we did with the E-7 wedge tail, where we buy something that already exists, adapt it to our needs, and then we have a capability much faster than if we greenfield it. So, you know, are there hindrances? Of course. We do have laid upon us, because we are the Department of Defense, rules, regulations, laws, oversight that does slow us down. It purposely slows us down in many cases. But I think what we're finding is a different risk posture within that oversight of what we do, as well as just the inspiration and leadership attention focused on going faster. I love General Brown's accelerate, change, or lose, right? Everyone can say it. It's very crisp and short, and it's very, very true. And so we're seeing it all across the Air Force and Space Force. I hope that was helpful.
Ma'am, Lieutenant General Retired Chris Miller with the Character and Leadership Center. Thanks for your remarks. I'm curious, all the services have something that enables them to do rapid acquisition, whether it's RCO or something else. And your point about deliberate slowness in some areas is relevant, but do you see a need for, or are there things in motion in this administration to improve the PPBS as a system itself that you think have some promise or that you'd like to see?
Yeah, that's a great question. We talk about in acquisition a three-legged stool of requirements, acquisition, what we do, and then the PPBE process, right? The budgeting stuff. And those three all have to work together to enable us to deliver capabilities to the warfighter. There is actually a commission that's been stood up to look at how do we reform and accelerate the PPBE process. But I'll give you a very straightforward example of how this bites us. So you have an S&T project, for example, and you can think of anything. That S&T project is going really, really well, but they're going very fast. And so they think, for example, that they will deliver some prototypes that will work 24 months from now. All right, so that enters the budgeting process. Now, the budgeting process has to look at that widget, that prototype that's going to be developed in 24 months. And they're looking at the budget 2 years from now. And that prototyping project just stood up. They're making good progress, but they're not going to deliver anything for 2 years. So the budgeting process itself is unlikely to bet that that widget needs money 2 years from now. It hasn't proven anything yet. That would be irresponsible. And if they did put money against it, Congress will say, that's irresponsible. We need to see if it's going to work out. So they'll take the money. So we don't generally do that. Well, then the project is going well. It gets looked at. Oh, now it's halfway. Well, maybe they had a colossal failure, like I mentioned before. Well, they're sure as heck not going to get any money in the budget now. Or maybe they're doing just fine, but still they haven't proven much. Now, all of a sudden, you get to the next year. fantastically successful prototypes. And the very next year, they have no money. What's going to happen to those fantastically successful prototypes? They have no money. They're going to try to scrape together some coin and try to do something. But that is the problem, the challenge that we talk about in terms of requirements, aligning to budget, aligning to what we do in acquisition. We call that the Valley of Death. You may have all heard of the Valley of Death, but the Valley of Death is when that prototype is fabulously successful, there's no money, there's no program to catch it. So what do? We've been trying a number of different, I'll say, tricks up our sleeve to deal with that challenge. They might be things like, Congress, please give us a transition fund so that if maybe even 50% of our projects turn out well, we have a pot of money that we can lay in to provide to them. So we're looking at things like transition funds. We are driving those decisions of let's bet on some of these working out and going ahead and putting that money in our base budget and then convincing Congress, look, we have to bet on some of these things working out. It's just like finding the unicorn in the venture capital world, right? At least one of them is going to turn out. Let's put some money we can put against it. So I think, I don't know what the PPBE Commission is going to report out. There's a lot of wise people doing the work, but I think allowing more of that to occur is very important. Allowing us the ability to match successful S&T with money on the other end, so there's no drop in that speed that we talked about. Absolutely.
Cadet Craven, Detachment 105. You've been talking about speed and we've been talking about creating things at scale. So my question to you is, in a world where our adversaries have global strike capabilities, how do we maintain those stable supply chains when our adversaries will do whatever it takes to slow us down?
Yeah, certainly I will say that Ukraine has woken us up in terms of the supply chain. I mentioned it in my remarks, and it's a challenge. The reality is if we were done buying a particular weapon, we would shut down the production line. And then if say our allies wanted to buy that capability, we might squeak down the production line to where it could just produce a trickle. So all that workforce goes away, all that tooling gets sold off, and you can't just turn that overnight. So in terms of what are we doing about this, we're doing a number of things. Number one, we are investing as a department in a number of production capacity areas. So you can think about raw materials, ball bearings, batteries, microelectronics, keeping those things that everybody needs and shoring up those production lines, and that whether it be raw materials or small component parts that everyone requires, we are investing a lot of money in those areas. That's number one. Number two, what we're doing is particularly in the area of munitions, we are committing to do, frankly, more production than we planned. You may have seen, I know you guys probably don't get a ton of time to read at least anything but schoolwork, but we have increased our ability to produce 155 rounds, which are the things that the Ukrainians are shooting every single day, 3,000 rounds a day. We are increasing that by 500% since the start of the war. And that takes time. We won't be 500% capacity tomorrow, but by the end of 24, we will be. And we have increased it quite a bit so far. So it's really keeping those production lines that we see as critical, particularly in the area of munitions, hot and fed with a steady demand signal, and building up our own stocks, as well as working with our allies and partners to fill their demand signals. And that's proving a challenge for industry as well, because again, it's not just funding. They need the manpower and the workforce to do that work. So as you may have heard, lots of people like to telework nowadays, and teleworking isn't really how you manufacture 155 rounds, right? And so trying to not only invest in the tooling, but invest in the raw materials, and then also that workforce piece that they need to really maintain the capacity that's required. Yeah. Sure.
Ma'am, C2C Shira Littman from Cadet Squadron 17. My question kind of goes back to the supply chain. So we see China outproducing us 5 to 6 times, but their production cost is also $1 to our $20. So how are we looking to like decrease our supply chain costs to produce at the same speed for obviously less cost?
So we do need to look at those more advanced manufacturing techniques. Think things like additive manufacturing, those sorts of ways we can reduce the cost of manufacturing. Automation is key. I will tell you that the way we produced 155s 30, 40 years ago is a lot the way we produce a 155 round today. But we are making strides in investing. When you have a capacity demand like we're talking about, those investments to also drive down costs make more sense. It makes more business sense to do that. And so that's exactly what we're looking at, is how do you both increase capacity while you drive down the cost, and do that through higher tech ways of production. And again, that comes with investment. It doesn't just happen. It won't natively happen. Our country and our department has to invest in those capabilities. We are also doing several things where we look at where we may be dependent upon China, for example, in the microelectronics area and others, and how do we onshore more of those capabilities. So again, it's not a problem we're going to solve overnight, but it is certainly one where I think with some time and the proper thoughtful investments in where are our choke points, where do we need to apply those boosts of S&T, that's how we're going to get to what you're talking about, and without going bankrupt, right? Because capacity can also just cost a lot of money. You have to be smart and make that business case. Anything else?
Hi, ma'am. C1CJ Canis from CSO7. What are your personal thoughts on the F-35 replacing the A-10? Will it happen? We talk about all this accelerate, change, lose, take risks, all this type of stuff. But then that's remained a fundamental aircraft and people love it, but we need to innovate. How do you balance that? And what are your thoughts on when it will happen? Will it happen?
So I certainly will not get out ahead of the Secretary of the Air Force or the Chief of Staff on that one. However, what I will say is that as we bring these new capabilities on, we do have to divest of our older equipment. It just becomes too costly to maintain. It becomes too costly to upgrade and to keep it relevant in the high-end fight. So I think you're going to be seeing actually a lot within the next year or two. The Air Force has focused on a divestment plan of how they're going to divest of a number of their older aircraft. So that is all in the works. In terms of competing F-35 and A-10, just remember that we use them for different purposes. And so they don't necessarily have to compete, but they do both need to be relevant in the fight. And I think today they are still relevant. The Air Force intends to keep A-10s around, I think until at least 26 was the last that I saw. But the divestment of older equipment is a focus area of the Air Force right now. I know he doesn't like my answer. He wanted me to give him a date.
Hi, I'm Cadet First Class Jacob Rush from CS21. More about the F-35 program with all the faults and failures that have happened recently in the news, but then how we continue to keep buying more F-35s. At what point does the DoD consider the F-35 program a success?
Oh, wow. Okay, that's a great question. First of all, I'll say as someone who's developed a lot of aircraft in a career, all aircraft have problems, every one of them. The F-35 is delivering to the warfight today around the world for our Air Force, but also the Navy, the Marine Corps, and all of our international partners. It is a wildly successful capability. It has certainly had its share of challenges as in terms of programmatics. It's taken too long, it's cost too much, but it is a fantastic aircraft. If you talk, we used to have a saying in the F-35 program that if you ever had a bad day, just talk to an F-35 pilot because they will change your day. And if you get that opportunity to talk to the operators of the F-35 in any service, in any country, they are fabulously happy with that aircraft. It still has a lot of room to grow. I think that the new Block 4 upgrades will make it a more competitive fighter when we look at the 2027 timeframe, particularly in the high-end fight against China. But in terms of is the program a success, every aircraft program has problems, and it's a fantastic aircraft. I don't know what you're planning to fly, but that's at the top of my list if they ever let me in a cockpit, which they're not going to, but I can dream.
Ma'am, I have another question.
Okay.
So how do you balance the de-investments, or correct me if I'm wrong.
Divestment, yeah.
Divestments of older aircraft like the A-10 when we're still engaged in conflicts such as, or we will be engaged in conflicts, let's say, in Western Africa, some other Middle Eastern countries where these platforms can be incredibly useful, and the tech that we do have, like the F-35, is just so much more than what's needed. Yeah. Why are we gonna divest in something that's proven to be true or proven to be effective if those conflicts are still going on?
Great question. Now you sound like my A-10 contingent from Congress. But what I will say is that we do need to have what we call fourth generation capabilities or low intensity capabilities across the board, whether they be attack aircraft, whether they be ISR platforms. We're seeing that a lot as well. CENTCOM, AFRICOM are consistently asking for more ISR capabilities. What I will say is I go back to that, remember that there's not infinite budget. We also don't have infinite people. And so you do have to make trades. So what do we fall back on when we have to make trades? First and foremost, we fall back on the National Defense Strategy. And the National Defense Strategy says our focus will be China. So we are focused on how we meet that high-end threat, with our capabilities while maintaining some level of capability, whether that be with our F-15s, our F-15EXs, the F-16s that we still have. Those capabilities are still relevant in other areas. And so you're just constantly, and this is what we do in acquisition, we're constantly balancing where do we have to put the budget? Is the budget going to be on the next platform or on maintaining and upgrading the older platform? It's consistently a trade of what's our mission, what are our priorities, and then how much budget do we have? Okay. Is that it? Okay. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, everyone. Okay. Thank you.
Well, let's give a warm welcome and thank you again. Not welcome. Thank you to Mrs. Skeen. We've on behalf of General Clark, USAFA, the Strategy Warfare Center, Colonel Swaim and I have a small token of our appreciation and thank you. We're delighted to give you the The bird. All right, thank you again, ma'am. Okay, that concludes this morning's activities. As I mentioned and promised this morning, we have a spread provided by the Falcon Club at the back, free lunch for all those in attendance. Please please enjoy that on behalf of the, again, Strategy and Warfare Center. We will be reconvening at 12:45 for a kickoff. So please be back in seats, ready to go shortly before that. Thank you.